Started. Good morning, and I would like to call our hearing to order this morning, and I would recognize myself for a 5-minute opening statement. First of all, I want to thank all of our witnesses today. We have 2 panel of witnesses, and certainly want to thank Administrator Dominguez for her constructive comments and her commitment to work with our committee. This morning we're going to be examining a discussion draft of a bill that reauthorizes the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration Pipeline Safety Program. This discussion draft contains targeted mandates for PHMSA to increase transparency and accountability, complete overdue regulations, and improve safety. I might say that working with the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, the House successfully ushered through the Pipeline Safety Regulatory Certainty and Job Creation Act of 2011 on a bipartisan basis. Now it's time to update that law. With today's changing energy landscape and the need to modernize infrastructure greater than ever, we're looking forward to a productive discussion on our draft bill with a goal of reporting to the full House the legislation by this spring for its consideration. Our Senate colleagues, I might say, on the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee reported S-2276, the Safe Pipes Act, on December 9, 2015, and we believe that a strong bipartisan bicameral effort will yield a public law we can all be proud of. I might say that I want to point out the unfinished business from the last reauthorization. The 2011 pipeline safety law included 42 mandates on PHMSA, and 16 of them remain incomplete, well beyond the statutorily imposed deadlines. So our discussion draft will require the Administrator to prioritize overdue regulations ahead of new rulemakings and keep us updated on that progress. So I really look forward to our discussion this morning, and at this point I'd like to yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. Pipeline safety is bipartisan. I'm a pro-energy, pro-growth congressman from the pro-growth, pro-energy city of Houston, Texas. But growth only happens if the people trust us, if we get safety right. Industry does its best, but government must do its part too. Sensible rules need to be written and effectively enforced. Mistakes cost lives. Inaction costs lives. And that's why I'd like to thank my friend and chairman for holding this hearing on a draft bill to reauthorize the Pipeline Safety Act. It's an important step forward. This bill includes some critical language on hiring safety inspectors that my good friend and fellow Texan, Gene Green, and I wrote, with another Texan, Brian Babin, and Janice Hahn, a Californian who went to college in Amarillo, Abilene, Texas. This process for hiring inspectors at the federal level is slow and difficult. Let's cut the red tape, put inspectors on the ground. Let's get safety right. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. This time recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Rush, for his 5-minute opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important and timely hearing today on pipeline safety reauthorization. And I want to also welcome Administrator Dominguez to the subcommittee and thank her for being here. Unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, it seems that every time we have a hearing on pipeline safety, we do so with the backdrop of either an ongoing spill or in the immediate aftermath of one. Of course, the most recent high-profile incident involves the 2015 leak at the Aliso Canyon natural gas storage field in Los Angeles, where it is estimated that over 90,000 metric tons of methane escaped into the atmosphere and thousands of families have been impacted. Other high-profile leaks include the May 2015 crude oil spill from a pipeline operated by Plains All-American Pipeline along the Santa Barbara County coastline. Before that, there was the July 2010 Enbridge spill near Marshall, Michigan. And later, that same year in September, there was also the Pacific Gas and Electric Company natural gas explosion in San Bruno, in the suburbs of San Francisco, just to name a few. Mr. Chairman, we all know that pipelines are necessary, and we must continue to build them to meet the energy needs of our nation. However, Mr. Chairman, we also know that many of the current pipelines are aging and they must be replaced, which may lead to additional problems if we keep kicking the proverbial can down the road. Mr. Chairman, we must assure the American public that this subcommittee of jurisdiction is doing everything within our authority to ensure that both current and future pipelines are as safe as possible. In the past, the issue of pipeline safety has been one that we have worked on in a bipartisan manner. It is my hope and my expectation that we will continue to do so in the same tradition as we address this important issue in this current Congress. So again, Mr. Chairman, I applaud you, and with that, I yield the balance of my time to my wonderful colleague from the great state of California, Ms. Capps.
Thank you. I thank my ranking member for yielding, and thank you, Chairman Whitfield and Ranking Member Rush, for holding this hearing, Chairman Upton and Ranking Member Pallone, for ensuring we consider pipeline safety in this committee. Welcome, Administrator Dominguez. Thank you for visiting my district recently. On May 19th, the Plains Pipeline 901 ruptured in my district, dumping over 120,000 gallons of crude oil along California's Gaviota Coast and into the ocean. This incident not only affected public health and the environment, but also our local economy that is strongly reliant on tourism, as well as the fishing and shrimping industries. While the May spill happened in my community, nearly all of us have miles, hundreds of miles of pipeline running through our districts, allowing for the transport of natural gas and hazardous liquids like crude oil across our country. So today's topic, pipeline safety, is incredibly important to each of us. That's why it is critical that our committee come together, as it historically has, to produce a strong bipartisan pipeline safety bill that builds on the lessons learned in the Plains spill, as well as incidents that have occurred across the country. I'm hopeful we can again make this a strong bipartisan effort. Unfortunately, the draft language as currently written is inadequate in providing the much-needed updates to pipeline safety legislation to ensure the protection of our public health and the environment. Whether we are discussing the pipeline rupture in my district last May or the Aliso Canyon natural gas storage leak just to the south of my district, these incidents occur all too frequently. And each time a failure occurs, just as it recently did in Chairman Upton and Ranking Member Pallone's and my district, the need to act becomes even more clear. It's critical that we take the steps and the lessons from these incidents and use them to strengthen our pipeline safety infrastructure. For example, the spill in my district highlighted the inadequacies of the inline inspection process currently used by PHMSA. Even with the shortened inspection interval, the Plains pipeline failed, spilling crude across the landscape into the ocean. So we have many results of this survey, and the PHMSA has the authority and the resources to require an appropriate timeline for inspections for every single pipeline in our country. We must ensure that the results from these surveys are made available to PHMSA and the public in a timely manner. We must strengthen the high consequence areas designation, something this draft falls short on, and there's room to strengthen these provisions in the draft before us. We must. We have this opportunity to improve the existing legislative requirements for pipeline safety. I ask that the chairman work closely with all of us to improve this bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. At this time, I recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Upton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just respond to my friend, Ms. Capps. I look forward to working with you and your staffs, and we're continuing to do that. Pipeline safety is something that I take very seriously, and it has long been a priority for me as well as this committee. Spills, as we know, can be very disastrous, and it's imperative that our laws stay up to date and work to minimize potential damage as well as try to prevent them from happening in the first place. In the wake of the serious oil spill that affected the Kalamazoo River just outside of my district, I worked on a strong bipartisan basis with my friend John Dingell in conjunction with our friends on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee to enact the Pipeline Safety Regulatory Certainty and Job Creation Act of 2011. While the legislation's name might be hard to remember, its positive effects are not. This bipartisan law helps prevent pipeline failures, strengthens safety standards, and holds those responsible for pipeline accidents accountable. We cannot achieve the intended objectives of the Pipeline Safety Act until it has been fully implemented. Hearing last July revealed that the PHMSA has failed to implement many of the mandates required by the law under the Pipeline Safety Act of 2011. Today, over 4 years later after enactment, at least 16 important safety regulations remain overdue. Rulemakings related to leak detection and emergency shutoff valves, public education and awareness, accident and incident notification are among some of the mandates PHMSA has failed to implement, which would greatly improve pipeline safety. The discussion draft before us today, Pipeline Safety Act of 2016, is a starting point in reauthorizing the 2011 law. The draft seeks to increase regulatory transparency, speed the completion of overdue safety regs, tighten standards for underground natural gas storage facilities and underwater oil pipelines, and reauthorizes PHMSA's pipeline safety programs. Taken together, I believe that the provisions included within the draft will go a long way towards improving pipeline safety, increasing the public confidence in our nation's energy infrastructure. And as we learned when examining the Kalamazoo spill, we needed to do a lot better job to improve pipeline safety. I think that we've made some progress with this draft, and the draft bill is certainly an important step forward. One of the things that I initiated is a new provision requiring annual inspections that are fully transparent for some deep water crossings of existing pipelines. That is, in fact, Section 12 of the discussion draft would require annual inspections for deep underwater pipelines. A change in law would mean that lines that cross under the Straits of Mackinac between the upper and lower peninsula of Michigan would be required to be inspected every year rather than every 5 years, and those results made public. Though I may not be able to stay for the entire hearing this morning, I would appreciate your comments, maybe even in your opening statement, as to the support, hopeful support of that provision as part of this bill. Feedback provided by our witnesses today will place us on a path towards enacting a bipartisan and meaningful reauthorization bill. I look forward to continuing with working with our colleagues on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, as well as our colleagues in the Senate, to get this bill done. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. This time I recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Whitfield and Ranking Member Rush, for holding this hearing on pipeline safety reauthorization and the discussion draft released by the committee last Friday. While I believe the draft could and should be much stronger, it's a good start and includes some important provisions on underground gas storage, pipeline safety technical assistance grants, and mandamus. The vast network of transmission pipelines in this country are essentially out of sight, out of mind for most Americans. But when something goes wrong, these facilities can make themselves known in devastating and sometimes deadly ways. Over the last year, we've witnessed both a 100,000-gallon crude oil spill into pristine coastline in Representative Capps' district in California, and a massive gas storage facility leak in Los Angeles. The leak forced thousands of people from their homes for long periods of time and released 96,000 metric tons of methane into the atmosphere, the climate-damaging equivalent of burning 900 million gallons of gasoline. My own district experienced the devastation of a pipeline failure in 1994 when a pipeline exploded in Edison, New Jersey, destroying about 300 homes. Yet 2 decades and 4 reauthorizations later, the Department of Transportation's Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA, has made little progress, in my opinion, in securing the safety of our nation's pipeline infrastructure. I hope that will soon change, and I welcome the new Administrator Dominguez, who I believe understands these concerns. It appears you and Secretary Fox are determined to bring positive change to this agency, and I sincerely hope you succeed in your efforts to ensure the safety of our pipeline system, and we look forward to helping you any way that we can. The discussion draft before us is a modest but balanced starting point for that effort. The draft contains language to address regulation of underground gas storage facilities like Aliso Canyon in California that leaked methane for 5 months until just a week ago. However, I don't believe that it goes far enough, and I hope the committee will consider adopting the stronger language of H.R. 4578, authored by Representative Brad Sherman, who represents the residents around this facility and lives in the neighborhood that experienced the most direct adverse effects of the leak. I'm encouraged that this draft includes language authored by Mr. Green that will allow us to finally begin a conversation about the need for PHMSA to have a direct hire authority. It's also critical that we provide the necessary tools, including funding, so the agency can attract the best and brightest inspectors and safety experts in order to carry out its responsibilities. We should also give the agency carefully crafted emergency order authority to ensure that PHMSA can address situations and facilities that pose a threat to life, property, and the environment. And we should remove barriers to PHMSA's success, such as the multiple layers of overly prescriptive risk assessment and cost-benefit analysis that have hampered the agency's efforts to improve safety. Finally, I'm pleased that the draft contains a provision restoring the ability of the public to compel PHMSA to perform its non-discretionary obligations. This provision is necessary to address an incorrect reading of the 2002 reauthorization by the Ninth Circuit. While I have great respect for the courts, it's clear to me that the Ninth Circuit's reading of the Pipeline Safety Act with regard to mandamus was just plain wrong. The law always contemplated mandamus-type suits to ensure PHMSA does its job. The mandamus language added to the statute in 2002 as part of the whistleblower protection provision was always intended to be in addition to what was already in the statute, not in lieu of the existing language, as the court incorrectly stated. At our hearing last year, we all voiced frustration at PHMSA's inaction on a number of fronts. While I know Administrator Dominguez is trying to change this situation, it's still important for the public to have the ability to access the courts to ensure PHMSA is keeping our pipeline system safe. And while I believe the discussion draft could be stronger, it's important to note that the last 3 pipeline safety reauthorizations were truly bipartisan efforts that moved our nation forward on safety. Our committee has always produced the best and strongest pipeline safety legislation, and I look forward to continuing to work with Chairman Upton and Chairman Whitfield, Ranking Member Rush, Representative Capps, and colleagues on both sides of the aisle to produce truly meaningful legislation that protects lives, property, and the environment while providing more certainty and reducing unnecessary burdens on industry. So thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Pallone yields back balance of his time, so that concludes the opening statements, and I would like to introduce our only witness on panel 1 this morning, and that is the Honorable Maria Dominguez, who is the Administrator for the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration at the U.S. Department of Transportation. She has had an illustrious career. She was at the Assistant Secretary for Civil Works over at the Army Corps of Engineers, as well as other positions. So we're delighted that you're here. We look forward to your testimony and the opportunity to ask questions. So you're recognized for 5 minutes, Madam Administrator. And be sure to turn the microphone on, too.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. Chairman Upton, Whitfield, Ranking Members Pallone and Rush, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify today on the reauthorization of the U.S. Department of Transportation's Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration's Pipeline Safety Program. PHMSA operates in a dynamic and challenging atmosphere. The demand for our work has increased, as has the complexity and scope of our mission and responsibilities. The development of new energy resources, advancements in technology, and the use of hazardous materials in everyday products impact transportation safety. Recent incidents and increased public awareness and sensitivity to safety hazards and environmental consequences have resulted in increased scrutiny of the agency and a demand that we become proactive, innovative, and forward-looking in all that we do. Addressing the mandates in the Pipeline Safety Act of 2011 is a priority for PHMSA. The Act included 42 new congressional mandates to advance PHMSA's safety mission, and we've completed 26 of those mandates to date. Since I was appointed last summer, we've made progress in addressing 4 outstanding rulemakings, including publishing a final rule on pipeline damage prevention programs and proposed rulemakings on expanding the use of excess flow valves in distribution pipelines, as well as operator qualification, cost recovery, and accident notification, and a significant rule addressing safety of hazardous liquid pipelines. We are currently, and actually I just got news this morning that OMB has completed its review, and we are planning on publishing within the next couple of weeks the gas transmission rule, which has been outstanding. Congress has made investments in PHMSA, providing 100 new positions for the pipeline safety program in the last year, and we've filled over 91% of these positions. Moving forward, we must continue to utilize the investments Congress has provided wisely. Over the past 6 months, I have worked to better understand PHMSA's strengths, capability gaps, and areas for improvement. We've undertaken an organizational assessment that evaluated the agency's structure and processes. This assessment provided PHMSA's leadership team deeper insight into an organization where safety is a personal value for all of our talented and dedicated employees, and it also highlighted critical investment areas. As a result, PHMSA has updated its strategic framework, recognizing the need to improve our capacity to leverage data and economic analysis, to promote continuous improvement in safety performance through the establishment of safety management systems both within the agency and across the industry, and by creating a division that will support consistency in mission execution. This new framework, called PHMSA 2021, was directly informed by PHMSA employees and will allow us to be more predictive, consistent, and responsive as we fulfill our mission in protecting people and the environment by advancing the safe transportation of energy and other hazardous materials that are essential to the daily lives of all Americans. PHMSA 2021 will allow us to better prioritize our work and be proactive in informing planning and execution. It will also allow us to be more predictive in our efforts to mitigate future safety issues and to implement data-driven, risk-based inspections, leading our regulated communities in a direction that powers our economy, cultivates innovation, and prioritizes safety. Thank you for continuing to invest in PHMSA. I look forward to continuing to work with the Congress to reauthorize PHMSA's pipeline safety program, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Administrator Dominguez, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. In your opening statement, you made reference to the gas transmission regulation. Now, is that proposed at this point? You all are not getting ready to finalize that.
It is a notice of proposed rulemaking.
Okay.
It would.
And that was one of the.
That's one of the outstanding mandates.
Yeah. And how many outstanding mandates are there right now?
Right now, there are 16. If we address the gas transmission rule, that addresses several different sections of the Pipeline Act of 2011.
Right.
And as I said, that'll be addressed in the coming weeks.
Right. Well, we appreciate that. You came to PHMSA, you had not been involved in PHMSA before. You were appointed to this position. I guess that you took over, was it in August or?
I was confirmed in August of last year.
Yeah. If you were speaking to a Rotary Club in rural Kentucky, for example, and you were talking about the safety of our national pipelines, how would you characterize it to a layman today, our system here in the U.S.?
Well, having worked at PHMSA, I can tell you that first and foremost, the employees of PHMSA are incredibly dedicated to our safety mission. And the safety mission encompasses hazardous materials and pipelines. And I can tell you that that level of dedication extends across the board to every aspect of our rulemaking, our inspection process, and our enforcement regime that we undertake as an agency. Pipelines is one aspect of that. It is a mode of transportation for hazardous materials that we regulate. We take our mission very seriously and look to make sure that we're continuously working to improve that framework for safety.
Yeah. Now, I think the pipeline industry's safety record is generally improving, but concerns have been expressed about a series of accidents. And do you think overall we're doing better, right? Or are you concerned about overall? Some of these pipelines are pretty old. Some of the improvements that need to be made have been delayed because the uncertainty about regulations and so forth. Do you think that the fact that these mandates have not been completed yet, is that contributing in a significant way to increased safety issues in your view or not?
I think we have opportunity, given the 2011 requirements, to continue to enhance safety. I think in particular, the two rules that we've been working on most aggressively in the last 6 months, certainly that I've personally engaged on, are first the hazardous liquid rule, and second, this gas transmission rule. Both of those were requirements from the 2011 Act and are very significant to actually improving the safety of both gas and liquid transmission. And they expand some of the requirements that will certainly enhance safety and we believe lead to greater protections across the board for people and the environment.
You know, Section 15 of our discussion draft is in parentheses, and it would allow a private individual to file a lawsuit against PHMSA for failure to perform a non-discretionary duty. Have you or has PHMSA taken a position on that particular part of this draft?
We've had a chance to review the language. It was published by the committee. Be happy to work with the committee moving forward on how to best frame that provision, that particular provision. But obviously, there are provisions for citizens to have the right to sue, whether it's the federal government or private entities.
I mean, they can sue you already, as a matter of fact.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, well, I'll yield back the balance of my time. Thank you very much. Recognize Mr. Rush for 5 minutes.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Dominguez, last week we had a very informative and inspirational meeting in my office. We briefly discussed the process for hiring talent for PHMSA, the challenges that PHMSA face when competing against the private sector. And I think that some of your insights need to be shared with the members of this subcommittee regarding some of the challenges and some of the possible remedies to help the agency attract top candidates to help you accomplish and achieve your mission. And in your comments, would you include your thoughts about Mr. Green's his proposal and whether or not this speaks toward the issue, but give us some insight into your challenges.
Thank you, sir. I believe you're referring to the ability for PHMSA to do direct hire, and the committee is certainly taking that up in their draft legislation, and I very much appreciate it. The Congress has been incredibly generous in providing funds to PHMSA. Over the last year alone, we were provided 122 new positions to the agency. 109 of those positions went directly to the pipeline safety program. And we've been working diligently to try and fill those as quickly as possible. We're at about a 91% fill rate right now. But I will tell you that it's difficult to compete against the private sector in particular. Everyone's going after great talent in this country, and the provision that has been provided on direct hire authority would greatly assist us, regardless of what the market is, in making sure that we can bring on folks in a timely way. And the federal process is such that direct hire authority would definitely assist us in making sure that we're able to access the folks with the talent and skills to work in these critical jobs.
So let me move on to another matter. What role should Congress play in helping to address the issue of replacing the nation's aging pipeline infrastructure? As you know, at one point during the negotiations of the larger energy bill last year, a subcommittee discussed the idea of creating a grant program to help mitigate the cost of replacing these aging pipelines for low-income families. Unfortunately, that program was scrapped. What do you believe is the proper role that Congress should play in this debate? Should the role of Congress be one of providing financial support, offering guidance, legislating minimal safety standards, or something else entirely?
I believe that the role of the Congress is to make sure that we provide the most stringent opportunity for safety in the pipeline area. And so the TAG grants that you're referring to, the technical assistance grants that the states have offered, are truly valuable investments to local communities. And they've helped educate communities on safety pipeline issues. They've helped emergency responders across the board. And PHMSA, I believe, has employed some very good internal controls on how we actually use those programs. We've reviewed, and our processes are such that how we award them and how they're actually administered is a good way forward. So we appreciated the provisions that were provided, and they've clearly done good work in communities.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chairman yields back. This time, Chair recognizes the Chairman, Mr. Upton, for 5. Oh, where is Mr. Upton? Mr. Olson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chair. Welcome, Administrator Dominguez. I'd like to talk about staffing at PHMSA. Where are we now? Where you would like to go, and how can DHA help? Followed up a lot of questions from Ranking Member Rush. In your testimony, you mentioned that Direct Hire Authority would cut hiring time from 100 days to 30 days, a 70% reduction by the math. As I mentioned in my opening statement, Gene Green and I have a bipartisan bill to give PHMSA, DHA authority for a few years as you work through the new regulations. But obviously, hiring only matters if you get those inspectors in the field. Can you please talk about how PHMSA is improving training for inspectors?
Thank you for the question. We have, as I noted, we've been aggressively hiring. And the opportunity right now, we've been able to fill about 91% of our positions. That said, as we bring people on board, we have a very rigorous training program that we've rehabbed and literally put in place. It is a boot camp of sorts, not only just for our new inspectors, but the states are also doing a lot of hiring as well, and the state inspectors are also participating in this training. It's being conducted at our Training and Qualification Center in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. We just hired a new director over the course of the last 6 months. He comes with a great deal of experience in this field, and as inspectors are deployed, they will have some of the latest and greatest tools at their dispense to use.
And that's important. Thank you, ma'am. About Section 2 and Section 3 of the discussion draft, they require PHMSA to keep Congress and the public informed of the status of overdue rules and tackle them before beginning new rulemakings. Do you agree that this is a sensible and achievable requirement, and any concerns about pressure points where you might feel some pressure to comply with these ideas, these new policies?
As I noted in my opening statement, the prioritization of the 2011 mandates is a very serious. It's something we take extremely seriously at PHMSA, and completing those mandates is truly a priority. That said, there's always emerging risk that needs to be addressed, and so I appreciate the opportunity to work with the Congress to complete the mandates, but we also need to be in a position to address any emerging risk as it does appear.
So it sounds like the 2011 mandates are pressure points. Any other pressure points you're concerned about going forward with keeping Congress and the public informed, more personnel, just whatever? I mean, how can we make sure you do your job and they people back home know that this is safe?
Well, I thank you for the investment that's been made by the Congress thus far. We're going to continue to make sure that we're using those resources wisely. Part of what we're doing is making sure that we're structuring the agency for that level of success as well. And some of the investment is to actually make sure that we're creating opportunities inside the agency to be more forward-looking, proactive, data-driven, and improve our economic analysis and data analysis so that our rulemaking is as strong as it possibly can be and meet the requirements.
And one final question. This is on Section 6 of the discussion draft that requires PHMSA to conduct timely post-inspection briefings with operators of pipelines. If there's a safety hazard, the operator needs to know so they can fix it immediately. Would PHMSA have an issue complying with this section going forward? Any issues with PHMSA going?
I'm terribly sorry, sir. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, ma'am. Section 6 of the discussion draft requires PHMSA to conduct timely post-inspection briefings of the operators of pipelines. If there's a safety hazard that the operator needs to know so they can fix it immediately, how does that knowledge get to the operator? That's what I'm saying. Can you take that mandate? Can you run with that, or do you need more help or something? Because these people need to have that information if they don't have it.
So we take our inspection process very seriously, and one of the things that is presently part of our requirement for all inspectors is to make sure that they conduct an exit interview in a timely way. Right now, it's a 30-day window for inspectors to complete their exit interview process. Moving forward, oftentimes it does take more time to develop any sort of enforcement requirements, whether that be a notice of proposed violation or other compliance measures that might be needed. So it's a very thoughtful process, taking in all the data, assessing it, making sure, but I do appreciate the need to communicate with the operator, and we continue to do that. So I will say that meeting that 30-day window of our initial findings is something that we're looking to do more consistently across the board, but it is a requirement right now within PHMSA. And then moving forward, as we develop those recommendations and any kind of violation orders or anything else, we do take those very seriously, and they are a very thoughtful process.
Thank you very much. I'm out of time. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. This time recognize the gentleman from, I was going to say New Jersey, but now I'll say California, Mr. McNerney, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. We're a long way from New Jersey. But we've had 3 high-profile failures in California over the last several years. So my first question, Mr. Dominguez, Administrator Dominguez, is do you feel that the states should have the option of requiring measures like shut-off valves, pressure monitors, testing of downhole devices if the federal regulators fail to do so?
Thank you for the question. The way the process works right now and what Congress has mandated is that the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, PHMSA, sets the minimum federal requirements across the board for all the states. The states are then allowed to go above and beyond those requirements, and any given state can choose to do so. And if that, regardless of what the requirement is.
So your requirements should be seen as floors, not ceilings.
Correct.
Thank you. Will the draft legislation help PHMSA prevent these and other failures? So the legislation we're talking about, or is there holes in the legislation that you think needed to be filled in?
Our requirements look to create what we believe to be the safety measure that needs to be put in place. And again, if states choose to do more and put in place more stringent requirements, they're able to do so.
Well, I mean, the current legislation we're talking about today,
Yes.
are there things that you think should be added or subtracted from that you'd like to discuss?
We've put forward a series of principles that I think address any additional requirements. We are looking in particular at other ways that we can enhance our enforcement capabilities.
So you don't want to advise us here today?
The one thing that I will say that's in my testimony is to look for additional opportunities for to level emergency order authority, an ability that other federal agencies have, and actually our hazardous material program has, which is also under our PHMSA's authority.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk about smart pigs versus direct assessment. My understanding is that if smart pigs could have been used in one of the high-profile failures in California, it would have prevented that, but they weren't able to be used because the pipelines were so old. Is that a common problem, that smart pigs can't be used throughout the country because of aging pipelines?
We do have an aging infrastructure system in this country, and one of the things that we've looked to address across the board is really encouraging. We've done a call to action over the course of the last 5 years, and encouraging states. About 37 states have actually addressed this by looking to incent and providing opportunities to replace aging pipes around the country. That said, there's still more work to be done, and how to pay for that is a difficult proposition. We are working directly with states and the industry to continue to encourage that replacement of pipe. And as you look at different opportunities on the inspection process, regardless of the tool that you use, you need to make sure that you use the right tool to address the pipe that you're actually trying to assess, so that it not only protects the integrity of the pipe, but you actually get the analysis that you're looking for.
Is there any technology on the horizon that will improve that
We're
capability?
constantly looking to invest in research and development. It's a big part of our program, R&D, to look to identify emerging technologies. The research that PHMSA has done to date has identified 26 new technologies, including sonar-related pigging capabilities. So it's a good investment.
Well, let's talk about substandard steel. Is this an ongoing problem, or has that been resolved and new pipelines that are going use up to standard steel?
I believe that PHMSA has addressed substandard steel in a variety of advisory bulletins and other things for the operators that have substandard steel to replace it.
Do you believe that the industry consensus standards often reflect the best practices, or do they reflect something a little less capable than the best practices?
Consensus standards are a very good way to actually identify opportunities to work together, both with states, the federal government, and the operators, to develop a set of requirements that the industry can then apply, both by executive order and by congressional action. adoption of consensus standards is a way forward in lieu of rulemaking. That said, rulemaking in and of itself provides a very strong basis for actually implementing this safety measures.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I haven't run out of questions, but I've run out of time.
Yes, you have. Thank you. This time I'll recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latta, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Administrator, thanks very much for being here today. The recently proposed rulemaking addresses hazardous liquid pipeline shows some incremental progress to address safety. However, there are overdue regulations, and I think you said that of the 42, you've addressed 26, and we have 16 to go. But when you're looking at some of these overdue regulations relating to leak detection and emergency shutoff valves, integrity management of natural gas pipelines, public education awareness efforts, and accident and incident notification. Do you know when we can expect some of these rules to be published?
Well, thank you for the question. We have addressed 2 major rulemakings, well, 4 since in the last 6 months, but we are looking at, we published a notice of proposed rulemaking for hazardous liquids last October. It was a notice of proposed rulemaking that went out. We are working to finalize that rule right now. We collected comments, our advisory committee met, and we are working to finalize that rule. We hope to have it out this year. As I noted, we have received confirmation that the Office of Management and Budget has completed its review of our gas transmission line as of this morning, and we will be looking to publish that as a notice of proposed rulemaking over the course of the next couple of weeks. That'll be available publicly, and then we'll work to complete that rule as well.
Okay, so that timeline you say is going to be in the next, what, 3 weeks on the last one you said?
On gas transmission?
Right.
As soon as we're able to, we will publish it. So hopefully sometime in no later than the next 2 weeks.
Okay, so, but just in the meantime, though, will PHMSA also commit to sharing a timeline or the schedule for that completion then? So you're going to have that out? Is that correct?
You're going to,
I beg your pardon?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Yeah, that you will commit to sharing that timeline, that if it's 3 weeks, but for the one, but for the others, will you commit to a timeline and getting that out?
Yes, and actually we do publish on our website the status of all of the requirements. They're available and we update it regularly.
Thank you. And what, if anything, has PHMSA done since creating the 811 Dial Before You Dig program to incorporate new technologies or best practices to improve communication between the stakeholders from receipt of an excavation notification until the successful completion of the excavation as recommended by PHMSA's 9 elements of effective damage prevention programs?
Damage prevention is one of the leading causes of serious death and injury related to, it's one of the leading causes of pipeline incidents. And so we have invested an enormous amount of time and energy and resources to making sure that we're not only partnering with the states and the operators, but we're also working with Common Ground Alliance to make sure that there's awareness across the board of these risks, and making sure that there's one-call centers available in states. There's some states that have not adopted one-call provisions. We're working with them right now. 811 is it's proven, the metrics are there, that if you actually call before you dig, the risk is almost eliminated of excavation damage. So there's huge value in making sure that those excavation rules are abided by and adopted.
Thank you. And finally, with about my last minute here, how do pipeline operators use the inline inspection or so-called smart pig technology to find problems in their pipelines? And then also, how accurate is the smart pig technology of finding cracks and other potential issues with the pipeline?
So as part of our requirements, we look to make sure that the integrity of any particular pipeline is assessed, and we put that onus on the operators to actually assess their own their pipelines. And we set the requirements for what they need to look at, how they need to look at it, et cetera, and interpret that data. And then we go and inspect to make sure that they're actually complying with the requirements that we put forward. The inline inspection tools that are available are constantly advancing. As we look to advance that technology, we'll have more data that's available to actually understand the exact operation of any given pipeline, assess it, and make sure that the operator is actually doing what they need to do to improve and enhance safety.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, it looks like my time's expired, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. At this time, the chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Capps, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you again, Administrator Dominguez, and your team for visiting the Gaviota Coast in my district and for appearing here today. As you may know, I sent a letter to your office yesterday with many of the questions that continue to arise in the aftermath of the Plains oil spill. And I ask unanimous consent to enter that letter into the records here, which I've done. But today I will try to narrow my questioning just a few of the still pressing issues as the central coast of California recovers from the Plains spill, with the goal that the answers will help make the legislation before us today as strong as possible. As I said, the safety of our nation's pipeline infrastructure is critically important to protect the public health and the environment and our local economies. I have several questions for you, and so if the briefer you can be in replying today, but longer answers could be submitted if you wish. You mentioned in your testimony, Administrator, that PHMSA is working to tailor inspection requirements to the risk profile of the pipeline operator. In the preliminary findings regarding the Plains spill last May, past inline inspection surveys used to assess the condition of the pipeline showed an increasing number of anomalies between surveys. All the while, Plains opted to decrease the inspection intervals between surveys voluntarily. Does PHMSA currently have the authority to mandate increased frequency of inspections for individual pipelines? And other than the prescribed frequency for pipelines within the high consequence areas, are there any established triggers that impact required frequency? For example, would a history of increasing anomalies discovered during sequential inspections, as was the case with this pipeline, would this automatically trigger a requirement for more frequent inspections? I'm sorry, that's a mouthful.
We do have the authority necessary to look at the requirements for frequency of assessing any pipeline, and that's what we do. What we need to look at in particular with the Plains accident is to understand, and we're looking at this as part of our final investigative report. As you know, first and foremost, thank you again for the opportunity to be in Santa Barbara with you and release our preliminary factual report, which identified a number of these issues and the facts surrounding the Plains case. That said, we're still conducting the investigation. As a result of that, if there's additional corrective actions that need to be taken, including anything having to do with an inspection capability, we'll certainly look at that as part of our recommendation.
Okay, I hope this will be something that the proposed emergency order that you described would be used for. But I'm going to turn now to a second question that I have. The draft legislation would mandate that all response plans include procedures and a list of resources for responding to worst-case scenarios. Here's my question. How frequently are pipeline operators required to update response plans? Are operators required to provide interim confirmation that a plan is up to date between reviews? And how does PHMSA ensure that plans are up to date? Again, that's a lot to ask.
So we, thank you for the question. We review facility response plans for completeness and accuracy. If anything changes, the operator needs to send it back to us. We look at it again. We want to make sure that the operator has actually considered all the risks and resources that are available in accordance with our federal regulations. If they're not complete, we send them back to the operator, and they must update them. And that's the procedure that we presently use with facility response plans.
I have one final question, which again, I'm running short of time, but given the tremendous damage that can be done to coastal areas, wherever they are, Great Lakes, the East Coast, West Coast, are these coastal areas that act as the transition from the land to the ocean, which is what happened on our Gaviota coastline? The pipeline ran along the inland and then found a culvert and ended up despoiling the ocean beneath it. Would it make sense to also increase the frequency of inspections to include these high consequence areas? Can you tell me how many pipelines, or is there a way to get that on the record, how many pipelines actually exist in these coastal areas?
I would have to get back to you for the record on the mileage with regard to pipelines along a coastal area, but I will tell you that our rulemaking is such that for hazardous liquids, we look to make sure that any area that we're providing the safest requirements possible for hazardous liquids. And our gas transmission rule that we're looking at right now, we're looking to expand the definition of a high consequence area. So we'll also expand that coverage as part of the gas transmission rule.
I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. This time recognize the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. McKinley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Migas, since the law was passed in 2011, 5 years ago, everything I've read has indicated that the rate of accidents, ruptures, leaks, explosions, has not decreased. Do you have something to the contrary over the last 5 years of whether we're making progress?
I believe that safety is a process of continuous.
Could you speak a little closer? I'm very hard of hearing.
I believe that safety is a process of continuous improvement. So as we've transitioned in this country to a very robust energy environment, it's been a very dynamic energy environment, certainly in the last decade. We are looking to make sure that all of our safety requirements are as
I know that. Listen, I understand that's why you got this job, apparently, because you didn't have a lot of background in hazardous material, but you did have a good background in communicative and political skills. So I'm just asking a try to direct question. Everything I've read is that the rate of accidents are not decreasing, and in many respects, actually increasing since the pipeline safety went into effect. So I know your mission, you want to achieve that, but you're not doing, from what we've read. That's why I was asking you, do you have evidence that ever since the pipeline safety, that it's been an effective tool, that you've actually been able to reduce it? Because coming from where we are in eastern Ohio, western Pennsylvania, and all West Virginia, we have a rush of pipelines. And as I said last year to your predecessor, virtually every month there is an accident, a flame, some rupture, some leak, something happening that we weren't experiencing before. So I'm trying to find a way to give some sense of confidence for the American public that our pipeline safety, our pipeline program is worth the investment and the time to do that. So again, let me try it again with you. Do you have evidence that our pipeline accident rates are decreasing, or is they status quo?
I would say that you should have every confidence that that not only is PHMSA robustly addressing our mission on pipeline safety, that we have a level of dedication to make sure that that actually takes place, and that the accidents that we're looking at, we're learning from and making sure that we have, whether it's Santa Barbara.
You don't have can you get back to me then, really?
I would be happy to
I'm
look.
sorry if I'm putting you on the spot. You're trying to play politics. I don't want to play. I just wanted some facts. Are we increasing or decreasing? And if you get that to that, I would appreciate that. The other is the lack of not having completed. I think last year we had 16 or 17 weren't completed, and in your statement, we still have 16 aren't completed. I'm missing something. Why aren't they finished? If there was a law passed, is this just part of the administration say we're just not going to do it? We're not going to enforce the law?
So in the last 6 months, we have moved forward on 4 and now 5 of the requirements from the 2011 Act. So we're moving as aggressively as we possibly can. It has been a priority for the agency to address these 2011 mandates. And I can tell you that our focus is very laser-like on making sure that these requirements are met. That said, the rulemaking process is one that is intended to be thoughtful and methodical, and it takes time.
Well,
So
you
I'm
had
not
five
using
ye-
that as
You
an
had 5 years to do that. I would think if you were in industry, I think you probably would have been fined by now if you were in industry and violated the law. So I'll be curious to see what the consequences are in finishing. I think your answer is the earliest you're going to get back to us with some of the answers or what the deadline might be, your timeline in getting those. I'd sure like to see that as well. But bottom line here is we have so much pipeline being constructed in West Virginia for the Marcellus and the Utica that if we took a poll right now, I'm afraid a lot of the residents would turn on the pipeline because they see so many problems associated with it. So I'm trying to get the confidence if we're going to be energy independent and we're going to be able to tap into this for our energy sources in the future, they've got to have confidence that with that farmer, if there's going to be a 42-inch pipeline across his field, that he doesn't have to worry about it. And right now, I don't think the American public has confidence in government now is giving us that assurance. So I really hope that you can finish your work that you were charged to do 5 years ago and get this thing at a point we can see a marked decrease in the amount of accidents across this country.
Thank you. And I will tell you that not only are we working diligently to complete the mandates that Congress has provided, but we're also looking to enhance our safety performance by employing safety management systems, which will raise the bar not only for PHMSA, but more importantly for the industries that we regulate to make sure that we're identifying and addressing all of the emerging risk, analyzing data, and truly informing that risk model moving forward. So safety management systems are really that next level of improvement on safety. And that's something that I am personally committed to, the agency is personally committed to, and I know we're working aggressively with all involved to get there.
My time's expired.
Gentleman's time's expired. At this time, recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank you for holding this hearing today and to thank our witnesses for testifying. I'm glad we're considering this important reauthorization legislation, and I think the discussion draft under consideration represents a good first step in the process. Administrator Dominguez, I'm concerned that PHMSA is still far from completing mandates instituted under the Pipeline Safety Act of 2011. Overdue regulations include those related to leak detection and emergency shutoff valves, as well as public education and awareness efforts. What are the biggest challenges facing you right now in getting these completed?
We've been working through a very diligent and thoughtful rulemaking process, and we have completed two, I think, of the most significant, although they're all significant, requirements in the last 6 months alone. The first one was on the hazardous liquid rule, which was published in October of last year. The one that I was addressing today, which OMB has announced that they've completed their review and will be looking, PHMSA will be looking to publish that over the course of the next 2 weeks, is on gas transmission. It's a very comprehensive rule addressing a number of areas with regard to integrity management of gas transmission and really looking at strengthening both hazardous liquid and gas transmission rules.
So what assistance can our committee provide to ensure that this is done as quickly and responsibly as possible? How can we be of assistance to you in that regard?
Well, I appreciate that the Congress has invested in PHMSA. We have received, as I mentioned, 109 new positions. Most of those positions have gone to the field. Those are inspectors. We're training them and getting them up to speed as quickly as possible. And we're also using the remaining funds to strengthen our capabilities. As I mentioned, one of the things that we're engaged in is organizing the agency itself to be more data-driven, more innovative, more predictive. And one of the things we're doing is looking at enhancing our data and analytics capabilities, which will in turn help us in our rulemaking by collecting data and informing our regulations in a more productive way moving forward.
I want to also ask you about emergency order authority, an authority other administrators enjoy. Can you describe in greater detail potential events that could justify the use of such authority and how having such an authority would be beneficial in those circumstances?
Thank you for the question. You're correct. Even within PHMSA's own program, we're responsible for both hazardous materials and pipeline operation, pipeline safety. And emergency order authority, we have it on our hazardous materials program side. We're seeking it on the pipeline safety side. An example of where we might use it would be there have been in the past defective fittings for pipelines that have been found. If we were able to have emergency order authority, we'd be able to ask that directly that operators address those defective fittings. Pre-1970s pipe, anything that was low-grade seal that needed to be addressed, that's in the past been found to be a problem. That's the type of work that we would do, something that would need to be addressed on a national basis. That would be the circumstance for an emergency authority.
Thank you. I'm also interested in LNG exports and certainly share your support for strong safety standards in this area. Are there particular areas within this subject you think require additional direction from our committee or the administration?
We've been working to actually look to see the LNG market is really transformed in this country over the course of the last 10 years alone. As you know, the United States has gone from importing LNG to now being a major exporter. I was just down in Louisiana a few weeks ago at the Cheniere facility, which is now online and exporting LNG on a global basis. So as we move forward, we've got a very changing energy market and a very changing dynamic. And we have the authority to actually establish and enforce the safety standards for onshore LNG facilities. So while we look at other methods of transporting LNG, that's something that's PHMSA is aggressively looking at right now, making sure that we're keeping pace with innovation and technology for other forms of transportation of LNG.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. This time, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator Dominguez, for joining us today. Section 11 requires that PHMSA issue new regulations for underground natural gas storage facilities, and the recent incident at an underground natural gas storage facility in California certainly highlights the importance of this requirement. So does PHMSA support this provision in Section 11?
I don't have the exact language in front of me, but I believe that
but you know that it requires you guys to issue regulations. So do you support that?
I will tell you that we have the authority right now to regulate the underground storage of natural gas, and we're working on, we do not presently have in place regulations that would address anything below the surface. So that would be something that we would work on.
Okay. Why do you think it's important for states to retain a cooperative role in overseeing these facilities?
We've been working cooperatively with the states for many years.
No, but do you think it's important that they retain that cooperative relationship?
Absolutely. I think that what we need to do is work cooperatively across the board. While PHMSA sets the minimum federal standards, the states are always able to exceed those standards. Okay. And should they want to put in place more additional requirements, they would be able to do so.
Section 16 of the discussion draft would reauthorize PHMSA's pipeline safety and grant programs. And later today, we'll hear from the states who would like to see an increase in state grants. The states do the bulk of the inspection work, and the pipeline statute allows them to be reimbursed up to 80% by the federal government. Did the states receive the full 80% reimbursement in 2014?
PHMSA, I will first and foremost tell you that we very much value our partnership with the states. And as you have stated, part of the money, a good portion of the monies that Congress provides us, we in turn grant to the states for their work.
We know that's what I just said. So my question to you is, did they receive the full 80% reimbursement in 2014?
The way that the process is done is that
did they receive it? That's a simple question.
the
Did they
auditing
receive
is that it's so long as they provide the records, we reimburse them for the requirements.
That's history, though. That's part of your records. Did they receive
I'll
the
have
full
to go back
80%?
and look to check the actual.
Can you? Well, I can tell you the answer, but would you get it and get it back to this committee,
I would
please?
be happy to.
The answer is no, they did not. It was only 75%. And can you give us any idea why they did not?
Again, as part of our process, what we look for is confirmation of, we set out a series of requirements for the states. They have to then provide their expenditures, and then we reimburse them.
Would PHMSA support a relative increase in funds for state grants? Since you've acknowledged that the states do the bulk of the work, would you support an increase in a relative increase in those funds for state grants?
I think the balance that we have right now, we're always looking to enhance safety. If that was a measure, the balance that we have now between the state and federal relationship is a good balance. And if there were more funds available for PHMSA to help execute its state grant program, we'd be happy to consider that.
I would think that balance would be improved if the states got the full reimbursement for their 80%, though. Would you agree with that?
I want to be clear, because part of the measure here is that there's transparency in the expenditures. And so while it may be 80% or 75% reimbursement, I'll check and get back to you for the record. That is something that is actually reviewed very seriously as we reimburse states for their expenditures.
Okay, all right. Very quickly, PHMSA, as you know, I believe, should encourage performance-based risk management regulations whenever possible, because this data-driven approach to safety offers the greatest flexibility, allowing pipeline operators to adapt their programs and plans to provide an adequate margin of safety. So it's been reported that some rules under consideration by PHMSA are unable to pass the cost-benefit analysis. If this is the case, why is PHMSA having difficulty incorporating cost into a risk-based regulation?
On PHMSA's pipeline safety program, in order to regulate, we have a requirement that Congress provided that our benefits have to exceed our costs. So our rulemakings contain that requirement across the board.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Lopesback of Iowa for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here, Administrator Dominguez, and taking the time to testify. It's been a pretty enlightening hearing for me. We have 99 counties in Iowa, and we've got pipelines everywhere, just like everyone up here. And safety, obviously, is the biggest concern. You know, as I read your testimony and as I hear your responses and what folks are saying here as well, and again, I'm just sort of trying to learn what you folks do exactly. What your oversight role is and all the rest. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that a lot of what you do is kind of after the fact, after pipelines have been put in the ground, after they've been built. Is that the case?
Actually, we have a great deal of responsibility on the front end.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure.
'Cause that's really what I'm more interested in than anything.
So part of our requirements for pipeline safety include requirements around new construction for pipeline. So our requirements look at making sure that operators fully evaluate any newly constructed pipelines that go in to check on any issues that could affect a pipe's ability to operate safely once it's actually in operation. So our inspectors go out, they look at welding, they look at any kind of coating, and especially for new construction, I can tell you that we have applied about 20 to 25% of our resources and inspections to actually go out and look at new pipe that's being.
If I can ask, I mean, again, that's kind of after the fact, right? That's once the pipes are already there. What about, for example, when states are considering new pipelines? What kind of a role do you folks play in that whole process? A utilities board, for example, is looking at putting the possibility of putting a new pipeline in, might run across the state, might be part of the state. What role do you play at that point in that process, if any?
PHMSA is not directly responsible for any of the siting issues that occur. So if it's an intrastate pipeline, the state would take that. If it's an interstate gas pipeline, FERC would take that responsibility. That said, we always work in close coordination, and we've been working with the state of Iowa as you've looked to educate, talk about the safety issues around pipelines. We've tried to work very cooperatively, and I think we've done some good work with the state of Iowa as you look to expand your pipeline network.
Who determines what these the sort of the integrity of these pipelines before a utilities board, for example, actually makes a decision as to whether the pipeline is going to be sited or not? Are those federal guidelines? Are those state guidelines? What are those guidelines, for example?
The actual integrity of a pipeline in its operations is something that PHMSA takes on directly.
And so the state of Iowa, for example, would know what those specifics are, and when that pipeline, before it goes into the ground, what those specifics ought to be. Is that correct?
The requirements for an operation of a pipeline and new construction criteria are standards that PHMSA sets.
Right. And the integrity of the pipeline itself, if
Yes,
you will. That's
we monitor the integrity of the pipeline itself. We put the onus of that operation through our integrity assessment requirements and integrity management practices that we have. We put that burden directly on the pipeline operator.
Right.
Yep, pipeline operator then has to collect data, and we go about inspecting that. And then if there's any anomalies or anything that we find, we take enforcement action against that.
But all that information is known to a utilities board prior to their making a decision as to whether they're going to site a pipeline or not.
We provide a lot of educational material to NARUC and a number of the public utilities commissions around the country. So
Would the proposed legislation here have any effect whatsoever on that, on those particulars and on that process?
I would have to look at the legislation and respond back to you.
Right.
I'm not familiar with a particular section of the proposed legislation.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that not only the utilities board in any particular state, but the public who are involved in the process have all that information as well, because there are public hearings, as you know, whenever there's a siting.
We have a great deal of material. PHMSA has a great deal of material on our website that talks about all of the many aspects that we actually cover with regard to new construction of pipeline, assessment, and enforcement actions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. This time, Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Mullen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this meeting. Ma'am, we do appreciate you being here. I know you're fairly new, and you're trying to get your head wrapped around it, and I commend you for what you're trying to do. Unfortunately, what we've seen is PHMSA is got a lot of concerns from Congress right now in the way that you're spending money and the grant programs that they're going to, and so that's one of the questions I have. Through the Technical Assistance Grant Program ran by your agency, it seems to be a tremendous help, providing additional training and education on training pipeline safety issues. Unfortunately, I'm increasingly concerned that some of these taxpayer dollars are being awarded to groups that publicly oppose new pipeline infrastructure, which was not the intent of Congress. With Congress looking to reauthorize the program, can you assure us that you'll provide the oversight necessary to ensure these grants are being executed as Congress intended?
The technical assistance grants that we have provided to states, I believe, are valuable programs for education for emergency responders as well as the communities around the country. PHMSA indeed has very strong internal controls to answer your question about how these grant applications are not only reviewed, but also how they're awarded and administered. And so that would continue moving forward.
Specifically addressing, though, the issue, how are these grants getting in the hands of people that are opposing it? If it's supposed to go for training, how is it going to people that oppose the pipelines? That has nothing to do with training. That has to do with people that are environmentalists, that they don't want the infrastructure built to begin with, and they're spending money to oppose the pipelines to begin with. It's already been happening, so how can you assure us it's not going to continue to happen? The oversight, what steps has your agency taken since you've been at the helm since August?
So as we look, as we move forward on technical assistance grants, we would look to make sure that indeed all of those requirements, whether it's review.
What are those requirements?
There's a series of requirements that each applicant has to meet before
Specifically, do you know what those requirements are?
I don't have them with me, but I would be happy to provide them.
Are they the same ones that's been in place, or have they been changed since you've been there?
They are the same that have been in place.
So no changes have been made to assure these programs can't be made. What we're trying to do here, ma'am, is we want to make sure that the taxpayers are being used for their intended purpose. And if there's been no changes made, we already know that these technical grants have went to organizations that don't support pipelines, period. They oppose them. These are training to provide safety for those that are installing the pipelines and maintaining the pipelines, not for opposition groups. So if you haven't made any changes to it, then you can't assure us that it's not going to continue to be spent in the wrong way.
I'd be happy to look and do an assessment of the recipients of the technical assistance grants to see where some of the actual recipients, what they've done with the money. But I can tell you that we do that as part of an annual process and review of our grants in general.
But even by saying that you did it annually, there's been no changes. So when does that happen annually then? Have you not done it since you've been there?
Not since I've been there, but we're coming up on a review of the programs right now, so I'll certainly take a look at it.
Could you please do me a favor, when you do look at it, could you get back to either this committee or to my office and let us know what changes are going to be made? Because I can tell you that if it's going to continue the way that it's going, then there's no way I'm going to be able to support reauthorization. Because our number one goal is to have the intent of what Congress had for it to be, for the tax dollars to be spent that way. And when we have opposing groups that are provided with grants that's supposed to be for safety and technical training, and they're using it to oppose the projects to begin with, it seems like that's a waste of taxpayer dollars. Would you agree?
I'm not aware of a direct instance where a group has come into those dollars, federal dollars, but I will certainly look at it.
Well, we will be happy to provide you with a list of those that have received those grants. Now, to switch real quick to my last question, I want to talk about states. What is the relationship between the states and PHMSA right now as far as with pipeline safety and training and working with the states and not against the states?
I think we have a very good working relationship with the states across the board. PHMSA is the federal regulator. The states often across the board have authority and through a certification process with PHMSA to conduct inspections within their respective states. We work cooperatively on that entire process. It's one where we're constantly exchanging information. One of the things that we're looking to do in this reauthorization is make sure that the inspection data that the states are collecting is something that we can collect at a federal level as well to make sure that the data analysis is as robust as it can be in identifying risk, and that's through our information sharing system.
Thank you, and I went over my time. Thank you, Chairman, for yielding more time to me. Thank you.
Mr. Tonko for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Administrator Dominguez, welcome and thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
As you may know, my district, which is in the Capital District region in upstate New York, has become a hub for energy transportation in recent years, seeing a tremendous boom in crude by rail shipments. Can you provide an update on the crude by rail spill response plan rulemaking?
Thank you for the question, sir. We are moving that rulemaking very quickly. As you know, the Congress passed the FAST Act. It made some changes to some of the provisions. We've updated the rulemaking to reflect those changes that the Congress passed in the FAST Act, and we've moved that forward through the department, the rulemaking, and are working with our colleagues at OMB for a review of that rule right now.
Thank you. And I know you cannot comment on the specifics of that package, but can you explain the gist of what was under consideration? What is under consideration?
For the oil spill response,
Yes.
we're looking at the provisions that were outlined by the Congress for and some of the requirements under the FAST Act to make sure that all of those provisions are addressed.
Right. And you mentioned the FAST Act and the fact that you had to incorporate that into your actions. Are there new requirements or timelines that you need to take under consideration?
There's
timelines?
new requirements for retrofit schedules and other things with regard to tank car top fittings and other aspects of the redesign that we've now taken into account based on the FAST Act.
Let me just state that I believe it's critical for the public and the emergency responders' safety that they have all the information, the resources, and equipment in place to respond to an incident quickly and effectively. And spill plans are an important part of that effort, and I am encouraged that you're moving forward. I hope it's done expeditiously so that we can finish the rule and provide those elements to the individuals and groups that I just mentioned. But to bring this back to pipeline safety, the National Academy of Sciences had a recent study that raised issues with PHMSA's review of spill response plans. Does PHMSA do their review plans based on completeness? Do you base it on completeness, or is the adequacy of those plans also taken under consideration?
PHMSA actually looks very directly at facility response plans for completeness and accuracy to ensure that the operators considered all the risk and the resources in accordance with our federal regulations.
And does PHMSA make recommendations about those plans that it feels are inadequate?
Yes, we do. We comment directly on them. We send them back to the operators if they're not complete, and require them to address any inconsistencies or any failings that we find in the response plan. They're obligated to then update them and resubmit them for review before we approve them.
And just how does that work in a functional way? Do they respond to those concerns about inadequacy?
They do.
And
it's an iterative process.
I didn't hear what you
said. It's an iterative process.
Okay.
So they're constantly being updated.
Thank you very much. And is PHMSA's decision not to regularly conduct two-stage reviews, one for completeness and one for adequacy, for spill plans an issue of lack of agency resources, or is it a lack of legal authority?
As I stated, we do look for both completeness and accuracy for facility response plans.
Okay, and has PHMSA made any progress in instituting the NTSB's recommendations on this issue?
We have been working, I believe that our requirements now meet the NTSB requirements, but I will check and make sure and respond directly to you.
Okay, and with an issue of resources, is there an adequate amount of resources to provide for an expeditious response to these efforts that come before the PHMSA group, or are there areas of resource activity that could be strengthening your response?
We have worked very diligently over the course of the last couple of years to make sure that all of the facility response plans that PHMSA reviews are up to date and complete, and we've put an enormous amount of resources in that process to make sure that has occurred. Moving forward, if there are additional areas for investment, we'll be sure to circle back with you. Thank you.
I would appreciate that. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. This time, Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Hudson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here with us today. I want to follow up on the line of questioning from my colleague, Mr. Mullen, talking about, and I was pleased to hear you talk about the importance of the cooperation with states. But my question is, if states are so vital to PHMSA's pipeline safety program, why did PHMSA announce that it intended to rescind existing state interstate agreements and disallow additional states to become interstate agents?
So I appreciate your question. One of the things that we have continued to work on is exactly how we would continue to make sure that not only are we working as cooperatively as possible. I had a chance, actually, one of the first meetings that I did was go and meet with the National Association of State Pipeline Representatives. These are the folks in every single state that, that represent the state inspection process and our partners across the board. And that group is a very dedicated group of professionals looking to undertake pipeline safety at a very, very local level. And we greatly appreciate our partnership with them. That said, we want to make sure that everything that we look at, that we use the money that Congress has given us to make sure that if there's a state that's been in trouble, that we're using the dollars to make sure that we're investing in that state to help rehabilitate them. The last thing we want to do is look to decertify a state for their state program. So any monies that are given to us for investment in a state would literally be used to help rehabilitate a state and make sure that we're not in a position of revoking their authority. That would be the last measure that we would look to take. Rather, we'd look to invest them and help them strengthen their program, first and foremost.
So, so this announcement of the intention to rescind existing state interstate agreements is only focused on states where there's a problem? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not aware of an announcement that PHMSA has made with regard to decertifying states. We would, again, our first action would be to work directly with the state and look to make sure that we enhance their capability to perform their program.
Okay, well, let me talk about gathering lines for a second. Section 21 of the 2011 law directed PHMSA to review and report to Congress on existing federal and state regulations for all gathering lines. With this report, which was submitted more than a year late, PHMSA stated that it is considering the need to propose additional regulations to ensure the safety of natural gas and hazardous liquid gathering lines. Is PHMSA reviewing the need to propose changes to existing exemptions from federal regulation for gathering lines? If so, when will this review conclude?
We are in the process of looking at that right now. Part of the work that we've done with our gas transmission rule includes gathering lines. And so as we look to publish the requirements that in a notice of proposed rulemaking for our gas transmission rule, it will include gathering lines.
Okay. And when do you expect that to conclude?
We received notice this morning that OMB is concluding their review, and we hope to publish the notice of proposed rulemaking for gas transmission sometime in the next 2 weeks.
Thank you. Switching gears one more time here before we run out of time, the issue of maximum allowable operating pressure. Section 23 of the 2011 law directed PHMSA to require each pipeline owner or operator to verify that the records accurately reflect the physical and operational characteristics of the pipeline and to confirm the established maximum allowable operating pressure of the pipelines. Inadequate records for older pipelines have been a long-standing concern. The statutory deadline was July 3rd, 2013. When can we expect PHMSA to finalize a regulation addressing this issue?
For maximum allowable operating pressure, a good portion of that is covered in the two regulations that I mentioned earlier, our hazardous liquid rule and our gas transmission rule. So the hazardous liquid rule is covered, a portion of that, but the gas transmission rule also covers how we would best address that for gas.
So that addresses the issue with the older pipelines where we had insufficient records. That's what.
Correct.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And as I'm about out of time, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Jimmy yields back. This time, Chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Long, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Doyle kind of hit on this question earlier,
but your agency still needs to fulfill 16 of the 42 mandates from the 2011 Pipeline Safety Act. And in your testimony, you mentioned, that 10 mandates will be addressed as part of the current rulemaking activities, but the remaining 6 are tied to reports and information collections. Why are several of these still in the early information collection phase?
We're working through those. Right now, we've literally several of these reports are tied to some of the rulemakings that we're doing. So as we publish the rules, we'll be publishing some of the reports. Moving forward, we're still doing some information collection. Technology is advancing, and we still have opportunity to collect some more data to inform our reports moving forward, and that's what we're focused on. So
tell me again, the technology is advancing, and that's slowing down the, I mean, technology is advancing all the time.
It is. So we're still working on information collection on several of those fronts. I'm happy to give you the details about exactly the specifics that you're looking at, but I think that the 2 remaining information collection opportunities we have underway, and I can give you a report. It's also on our website, but I'll be happy to give you a direct update on it.
Okay, because what I'm kind of looking for is how we can speed up that process and get the information. So, production of liquefied, excuse me, I didn't know I had a frog in my throat before I started this. Production of liquefied natural gas has increased significantly, as you know, in the last few years. How has your agency kept up with the LNG boom, and have you been able to effectively update codes and design standards to keep up with this boom?
So we've been looking very directly at LNG. It's something that, as you noted, is really changed the landscape of the United States. And one of the things that we're looking at is how we would update our regulations to make sure that we are keeping pace with the technology as it moves forward. We're updating our regs right now to provide for certainty in the design, in the construction and the operation of small-scale liquefaction facilities moving forward.
How effectively do you work with FERC as a coordinating agency for sitting and reviewing LNG facilities?
We have a good working relationship with FERC, and they are directly responsible for a number of the siting requirements, in particular for large-scale LNG facilities.
In your testimony, you mentioned the important role states play in inspecting and enforcing both federal and state regulations. How closely do you work with these states in developing those regulations?
We work very closely with the states. The Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration is directly responsible for setting the federal standards, and in turn, states then adopt those standards and are able to go above and beyond our requirements. And as the states directly carry out through a certification process with PHMSA some of the inspection requirements, we work hand in glove with them, not only to make sure that their state inspectors come to our training facility, can take advantage of our and we help provide funds to make sure that they're able to come and get trained on the requirements. But then we also work very directly with them in the execution of their state programs.
Of the what?
Their state programs.
Okay, so setting safety standards, things
Correct.
of that nature?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. This time the chair recognizes Mr. Griffith of Virginia for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Do appreciate you being here today. I apologize. We had a meeting related to the coal industry and black lung. We had a roundtable that Chairman Bobby Scott and another committee was hosting, and I have a district that has produced a lot of coal over the years, and so that was an important issue as well. Now, along those lines, we have a lot of pipelines being built now because of what I would see as the EPA's war on coal and the shutdown of like half of the industry in the last couple of years. The EPA is moving to regulate emissions of methane in the oil and gas industry by requiring oil and gas processing and transmission facilities to find and repair methane leaks. This was a part of a speech given last week by the EPA director, administrator. PHMSA has already proposed leak detection rule and has worked with the industry to reduce leaks. In fact, I think overall methane emissions are down about 13% in the last couple of years through various things that you all are doing. I have concerns about the EPA imposing new regulations on pipeline operations that PHMSA already regulates. Has PHMSA provided any advice or guidance to the EPA in their development of their strategies and their proposals? Has EPA solicited any advice from you all? And does PHMSA foresee working with the EPA in the development of yet new regulations in this arena? And because time is short, if you could answer all that quickly, I'd appreciate it.
I think that one of the issues that country is the issue of aging infrastructure writ large, and one of the byproducts of aging infrastructure is leaks, particularly in natural gas pipelines. So as we look to invest in replacement of old pipe, that helps reduce methane emissions, but also across the board helps with that larger goal. We always look to partner with our federal,
Yes, ma'am.
across the board. So would be happy to continue to do that.
Well, it appears you all have been doing a fairly good job, so I hope they don't come in and start changing a lot of things. I would also have to note that according to Ms. McCarthy, the administrator of the EPA, methane is upwards of 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So I'm a little concerned about that because they've been working so hard to eliminate coal as a fossil fuel that's used in this country, of which we have an abundant supply. I wonder if this is just the opening salvo in a new war on natural gas. That being said, though, we do have a lot of natural gas pipelines being built. The Mountain Valley Pipeline is coming through my district. Very pleased to see that you all participated in the scoping hearings related to the Mountain Valley Pipeline. And so I guess I have to ask, what role do you all play in advising or assisting either the pipeline companies or FERC prior to FERC approval of a new gas pipeline?
Thank you for the question. We are truly in an advisory and a support role, both to the states and to FERC during the siting process. So if there's questions about safety, we often partner with FERC or the states to make sure that if citizens have questions during public meetings, et cetera, we talk through what our requirements are for design, construction, et cetera, of new pipeline.
I appreciate that. In mountainous crossings, and my district has got a lot of mountains in it, what are PHMSA's top concerns, and where do you see greatest difficulty in ensuring the long-term structural safety of pipelines when they're crossing over and through mountains?
I would tell you that our requirements are fairly robust in the new construction criteria. And so regardless of terrain, there are requirements that look at the geology of any particular area, and that those requirements are met as new pipe is constructed.
And are there other areas that you believe that PHMSA and FERC could collaborate to a greater extent to ensure the safety concerns that a lot of my constituents are raising, and can you get in early in that process as well?
We, I believe, have been working. I had a chance to meet with the chairman of FERC, Norman Bay, and we've been working very collaboratively at a very local level to make sure that we're addressing citizens' concerns. And PHMSA's role in all of that is to, again, articulate what our safety mission is and how the actual operation of a pipeline would work once it's in the ground.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and that concludes the questions, except I have one other question before I let you go. Frequently, we see charts of reportable incidents of pipeline safety, and it seems to be going up. What is the actual definition of an incident or a significant incident at PHMSA?
I don't have the actual definition if it's published ready at hand, but I will tell you that anytime there's an impact on people or the environment, that impacts the work that we do as a result of the operation of a pipeline. So,
I mean, so if a pipeline leaks any amount, is that an incident that must be reported, or?
I will be happy to clarify for the record exactly what the requirement is for reporting on an actual incident.
Okay. Yeah, I would appreciate that, because I think that's important for us to know. And Madam Administrator, thank you very much for taking time to be with us today. We appreciate your testimony and look forward to working with you as we move forward. And that concludes the questions for you. So at this time, I'd like to call up the second panel of witnesses. And on the second panel of witnesses, we have 5 panelists. And rather than introduce all of them right now, I'm just going to introduce them one time, and that's when I recognize them for their testimony. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay, our first witness this morning is Mr. Norman Sari, who is a commissioner for the Michigan Public Service Commission, and he's testifying on behalf of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. So, Mr. Sari, thanks very much for joining us, and you're recognized for 5 minutes. Be sure and just turn that microphone on. And
I beg your pardon, sir. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. When Henry Ford rolled his first car off the assembly line in 1913, it may have traveled on roadway that already had natural gas pipeline buried beneath it. That Ford Model T is likely now in a museum, but there may be some of the city's original gas pipeline still intact and still in use. That car was probably taken out of service because of its reliability and safety. We have a responsibility to make sure that the pipeline meets up-to-date reliability and current safety standards, or it too must be taken out of service or replaced. The Michigan Public Service Commission joins with regulators nationwide to work on programs that ensure safe operations of the existing natural gas infrastructure on new projects, with a top priority of protecting public health and safety in an environmentally conscious manner. We join and collaborate with the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, PHMSA, the U.S. Department of Transportation, FERC, and other federal agencies to coordinate these programs between federal interstate pipeline jurisdiction and state intrastate regulation. As I have highlighted in my submitted testimony, states rely upon a working partnership with PHMSA to develop and coordinate pipeline safety programs. This mutual effort requires sufficient federal funding needed to achieve the excellence we seek to administer one-call programs, complete timely inspections of new and existing natural gas lines, monitor and regulate gas storage facilities, and promote public education and awareness. The Michigan Commission works with its local companies to regulate programs for gas main construction and replacement and gas storage field operations and safety upgrades, while finding the proper balance of what its ratepayers can afford to pay. Meeting the completion targets of replacing over 7,000 miles in Michigan of natural gas mains will require expenditures over the next decade in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Other states have similar financial challenges. Staying on track and on target to meet these goals will require increased financial support from PHMSA to the states. Current law says that the states may be reimbursed up to 80% by the federal government. During the 4 years prior to 2014, states averaged only 73% reimbursement and needed to request suspensions to merely achieve that level of reimbursement. In 2014, the latest year money was reimbursed to the states. The base grant was about $42.2 million for gas and hazardous liquids. The states spent about $56.4 million on these pipeline safety programs. This meant states as a whole were reimbursed approximately 75% of what they spent. In order to keep state programs where they currently are, we would respectfully request an authorization for appropriation and appropriation for the FY16 of no less than $49.5 million for state-based grants, increasing by no less than 4% each fiscal year thereafter. We need to be fully authorized and funded to carry out our mission. We all benefit from a sharing of information on best work practices, best regulatory approach, and best use of resources to meet these goals. Thank you for the opportunity to tell you that Michigan joins with NARUC and all other state regulators to work collaboratively with government and various stakeholder groups to achieve a world-class pipeline safety program. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Sari, thank you very much. Our next witness is Mr. Ron Bradley, who's Vice President of Gas Operations at PECO Energy, and you're testifying on behalf of the American Gas Association. And welcome, and you're recognized for 5 minutes, Mr. Bradley.
Good morning, Chairman Whitfield and members of the committee. My name is Ron Bradley, and I serve as Vice President of Gas Operations at PECO, which safely provides reliable electric and natural gas service to approximately 2 million customers in southeastern Pennsylvania. PECO is part of the Exelon family of companies. Exelon is the nation's largest competitive energy provider, serving more than 8 million electric and natural gas customers in Illinois, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. Today, I'm testifying on behalf of the American Gas Association, which represents more than 200 local distribution companies, also known as LDCs. AGA members companies operate 2.5 million miles of underground pipeline, safely delivering clean, affordable natural gas to more than 71 million customers. LDCs provide the last critical link in the energy delivery chain, connecting interstate pipelines directly to homes and businesses. Our focus every day is ensuring that we keep the gas flowing safely and reliably. As part of an agreement with the federal government, most states assume primary responsibility for the safety regulation of LDCs, as well as intrastate transmission pipelines. Many states adopt standards that exceed federal requirements. Additionally, our companies are in close contact with state pipeline safety inspectors, which permit a greater number of inspections to occur than is required by federal law. In addition to a culture of compliance, LDCs embrace a culture of proactive, collaborative engagement. Each company employs trained safety professionals, provides safety training, conducts rigorous system inspections, testing, maintenance and repair, and replacement programs, and educates the public on natural gas safety. AGA's commitment to enhancing safety, adopted in 2011, provides a summary of these commitments beyond federal regulation. The commitment to enhancing safety has been modified several times to address new issues that have been identified, and was recently modified to include actions to improve the safety of underground storage operations. The AGA has also developed numerous pipeline safety initiatives focused on raising the bar on safety, including peer-to-peer reviews and best practice forums that share best practices and lessons learned throughout the industry. Each year, LDCs spend approximately $22 billion on safety, approximately half of that on our voluntary actions. This number continues to escalate as work commences on newly approved accelerated pipeline replacement programs. Now, turning to a review of the legislation, the Pipeline Inspection, Protection, Enforcement, and Safety Act of 2006 and the Pipeline Safety Regulatory Creation and Job Creation Act of 2011 created new programs to improve the safety of the industry. AGA member companies have implemented aspects of these programs either voluntarily or through DOT regulation. However, many of these programs are in their infancy in terms of implementation, and we encourage Congress to allow these programs to develop and mature in order to realize their full impact. In case of the unanimously passed 2011 Act, several regulations have yet to be promulgated or finalized. The progress is being made. It is very important that the focus be on finishing the outstanding work. We commend the committee for emphasizing this in its initial draft. Layering new laws and regulation onto companies before existing regulations have been finalized and provided time to succeed creates uncertainty that undermines our shared safety goals. While we appreciate the committee's efforts to put forward a bipartisan bill, we are supportive of most of the text. We're very concerned that Section 15 of the draft bill would allow a person to bring a civil action in a district court of the United States for an injunction against PHMSA for failure to perform any non-discretionary duty, even if PHMSA was engaged in enforcing its mandatory obligations under the law. This would have a deleterious effect of undermining and thus weakening federal regulatory oversight this committee seeks to enhance, and could cause market uncertainty, Moreover, to the extent that PHMSA would have to dedicate resources and time to litigation or complying with a court order, it could significantly diminish the agency's ability to work on other congressional priorities, thus negatively impacting pipeline safety. The creation of such a legal remedy could be used by individuals, however well-intentioned, in a way that would be counter to the best interests of the nation, individual states, industry, and ultimately consumers, while not necessarily enhancing safety. Thus, we respectfully urge the removal of Section 15 of the bill. The industry is already experiencing significant uncertainty regarding PHMSA's implementation of outstanding mandates in the 2011 bill. Regarding replacement of cast iron mains, a focus of the 2011 Pipeline Safety Reauthorization, the quantity of these mains continues to steadily decline. Cast iron main now makes up less than 2% of total mileage. Natural gas utilities are working with legislators and regulators to accelerate the replacement of these pipelines. Today, 39 states and the District of Columbia have adopted specific rate mechanisms that facilitate accelerated replacement of pipelines that are primary candidates for system enhancement. In addition to what I've highlighted, my written testimony provides updates on the industry's efforts with regard to incident notification, data collection, and information sharing, and research and development. I'm pleased to answer questions on these topics or any other topics that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. Our next witness is Mr. Andrew Black. Delighted to have you back at the Energy and Commerce Committee, Andy. And he's President and CEO of the Association of Oil Pipelines and also, at my understanding, testifying on behalf of API. So you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member. The Association of Oil Pipelines represents transmission pipeline operators who deliver crude oil, refined products like gasoline, diesel fuel, and jet fuel, and natural gas liquids such as propane. As the Chairman indicated, I'm also testifying on behalf of the American Petroleum Institute. Our U.S. pipelines safely deliver more than 16.2 billion barrels of crude oil and energy products a year. Pipelines play a critical role in delivering energy to American workers and families. Americans use the energy our pipelines deliver in their cars and trucks to commute to work or drive on the job, provide rural heating and crop drying, and support good-paying manufacturing jobs. The average barrel of crude oil or petroleum products reaches its destination safely by pipeline greater than 99.999% of the time. Addressing Mr. McKinley's question of earlier, according to PHMSA data, significant liquids pipeline incidents that could affect high-consequence areas are down 8% over the last 5 years. Significant incidents per mile that are over 50 barrels in size are down 19% over the last 5 years. But even with these positive pipeline safety performance numbers, the member companies of AOPL and API are constantly working to improve pipeline safety further. Last year, operators completed development of a number of industry-wide recommended practices and technical reports to improve our ability to detect pipeline cracking, integrate safety data, manage safety efforts holistically, manage leak detection programs, and better plan for and respond to pipeline emergencies. This year, we turn to implementation of these safety recommendations industry-wide. A prime example is our effort to encourage and assist implementation of API Recommended Practice 1173 for pipeline safety management systems. Recommended by the NTSB and developed in conjunction with PHMSA and state pipeline regulators, this tool is helping pipeline operators comprehensively manage all the safety efforts underway across the company. The aviation, nuclear power, and chemical manufacturing industries have benefited from safety management systems. Now more pipeline operators are benefiting too. This year, pipeline operators will also complete expansion of industry-wide recommended practices on river crossings, develop a new one for construction quality management, and update industry-wide recommendations for pipeline integrity program management. This last safety improvement action brings us to last summer's pipeline release near Refugio, California. We echo Transportation Secretary Fox's calling the preliminary incident report from PHMSA an important step forward that will help us learn what went wrong so that everyone involved can take action and ensure that it does not happen again. Our members are committed to doing just that. PHMSA's preliminary factual findings could be described as the what of the incident. We expect PHMSA's final report later this year will contain root cause analysis and recommendations describing the still unknown how and why this incident occurred. At a minimum, we know there is opportunity for further industry-wide discussion and perhaps guidance for those operators that use the specific type of pipe involved in that incident, insulated pipe transporting heated crude. As part of our update of this industry-wide integrity management guidance, we will ensure learnings from industry-wide review and PHMSA incident report recommendations are reviewed and incorporated where appropriate. The effort should be finished later this year, far more expeditiously than could occur through an agency notice and comment rulemaking process. Turning to the next reauthorization, there is still much left for PHMSA to do from the 2011 law. PHMSA is working to finalize a broad liquids pipeline rulemaking, as the Administrator said, and may propose a rulemaking on valves soon. We commend Congress for its recent oversight in PHMSA, which has resulted in the Administration issuing several rulemaking proposals and promising additional proposals, and we encourage your ongoing oversight. Pipeline operators have not stood by, and instead have advanced safety initiatives on inspection technology, cracking, data integration, safety management, leak detection, and emergency response. With the numerous recent industry initiatives addressing current pipeline safety topics and additional PHMSA regulatory actions still to come, we encourage Congress to reauthorize the Pipeline Safety Program soon without adding significant new provisions. Upon a brief review of the committee's discussion draft, AOPL and API would find it difficult to support the draft with the inclusion of Section 15. Private, mandamus, civil actions to compel agencies to perform certain duties have earned the moniker sue and settle because of their abuse at agencies such as EPA. A Chamber of Commerce report identified 60 cases of sue and settle lawsuits from 2009 to 12, resulting in 100 new EPA regulations costing from tens of millions to billions of dollars each. Sue and settle circumvents public participation, dilutes congressional oversight, bypasses standard administration review and analysis, and it limits agency transparency. In January, the House expressed its concern with sue and settle abuse by passing H.R. 712, reforming these processes in legislation that sadly appears unlikely to become public law. We urge that Section 15 be removed from the draft. Thank you for inviting me here today, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Black. And our next witness is Mr. Donald Santa, who's President and CEO of the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America. Welcome back, Mr. Santa, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Whitfield, Ranking Member Rush, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Donald Santa, and I'm President and CEO of the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America, or INGA. INGA represents interstate natural gas transmission pipeline operators in the U.S. and Canada. The pipeline systems operated by INGA's 24 member companies are analogous to the interstate highway system, transporting natural gas across state and regional boundaries. INGA testified before this subcommittee last July regarding pipeline safety and reauthorization of the Pipeline Safety Act. In that testimony, I outlined INGA's safety commitments undertaken in 2011 and the most recent amendments to the law that specifically affect natural gas transmission safety programs. I direct my testimony today to the specifics of the draft reauthorization bill now before the subcommittee. INGA has consistently advocated 3 goals in connection with the pending reauthorization of the Pipeline Safety Act. These goals are, first, establish authorized funding levels for the pipeline safety programs at PHMSA for the next 4 fiscal years. Second, continue to focus PHMSA rulemaking resources on completion of the remaining mandates from the 2011 reauthorization, with one exception noted below. And third, that exception, create federal minimum safety standards and regulations for underground natural gas storage facilities. The discussion draft meets these 3 goals, and it is also very similar to the bill, S-2276, approved last December by the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. That legislation is now pending before the full Senate and may be approved as early as this week. We appreciate that this subcommittee's discussion draft parallels the Senate bill in most respects, because this will make it far easier to conference the 2 bills. A few quick points. First, the fiscal years covered by this authorization. The Senate legislation covers fiscal years 2016 through 2019. While this technically would be a 4-year authorization, as a practical matter, FY16 has already been appropriated, and by the time this legislation is enacted, the current fiscal year will be close to an end. For this truly to be a 4-year authorization, INGA suggests beginning with the FY17 authorization, or in the alternative, making the authorization effective through FY20. Second, we agree with the manner in which the underground natural gas storage section was drafted, and especially the clarification that PHMSA may delegate to a state the authority to regulate intrastate storage facilities. This provision has our support. The discussion draft, however, differs from the Senate bill in one important respect. Namely, the draft includes a provision that would allow an individual to petition a federal district court to enjoin PHMSA in connection with that agency's alleged failure to act. As explained further in my written testimony, INGA believes that this provision is ill-advised. It would allow the priorities of individual parties and the judgment of a federal district court judge to supplant the pipeline safety priorities and the allocation of agency resources established by PHMSA pursuant to the guidance provided by Congress. INGA would seriously consider opposing the pipeline safety bill if this provision were included. My written testimony includes comments on several other provisions in the draft bill, which in the interest of time I will omit from my oral statement. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to provide INGA's views on the discussion draft. I'd be happy to answer your questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Santa. And our next witness is Mr. Carl Weimer. Welcome back, Mr. Weimer. And he's testifying on behalf of the Pipeline Safety Trust, where he's the executive director, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Whitfield, Ranking Member Rush, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to speak today on the important subject of pipeline safety. The Pipeline Safety Trust came into being after a pipeline disaster that occurred nearly 17 years ago. At that time, we were asked by the federal courts to create a watchdog organization over both the industry and the regulators. We have been trying to fulfill that vision ever since, but the increase in the number of significant incidents over the past decade, driven primarily by releases from liquid pipelines from causes well within pipeline operators' control, makes us sometimes question whether our message is being heard. Today, I would like to dedicate my testimony in the memory of Peter Hayes, who I met shortly after a Chevron pipeline dumped oil into Red Butte Creek in Salt Lake City. Mr. Hayes, a school teacher, was raising his family in a home that sat on the banks of Red Butte Creek, and he was extremely concerned about the possible long-term health effects to the people in that area who were not evacuated immediately and experienced many different health symptoms associated with exposure to crude oil. He pushed hard for better emergency response and for someone to follow up with a study to determine whether people so exposed would experience any long-term health problems. No one ever did such a study, and in a tragic twist of fate, Mr. Hayes came down with a rare lung disease that may in part be caused by such exposure to environmental pollutants. He died last year. The need for studies on the health effects of exposure to oil spills has long been a void in our National Pipeline Safety System and was recently again called for by a National Academy of Sciences panel. Often in these hearings, the focus is on how PHMSA has failed to implement various mandates and move too slowly on regulatory initiatives. While we agree that those things are all important and fair game at such hearings, today we would like to focus our testimony on how the pipeline safety system that Congress has created also has much to do with PHMSA's inability to get things done. PHMSA can only implement rules that Congress authorizes them to enact, and there are many things in the statutes that could be changed to remove unnecessary barriers to more effective and efficient pipeline safety. The pipeline safety statutes are the responsibility of Congress, and today we will speak to issues where Congress needs to act if there is a real desire to improve pipeline safety. Some of the things that Congress could change fairly easily would be to provide PHMSA with emergency order authority like other transportation agencies have. This would allow PHMSA to quickly correct dangerous industry-wide problems, such as the lack of minimum rules for underground gas storage or the lack of valid verification of maximum allowable operating pressures. At the same time, by eliminating the unique and duplicative cost-benefit requirement in the pipeline statute, normal rulemakings could proceed at more than the current glacial speed. Congress also needs to harmonize the criminal penalty section of PHMSA statutes so in the rare case when pipeline companies willfully or recklessly cause harm to people or the environment, they can be prosecuted as is necessary. And Congress should also add a strong mandamus clause, as suggested in this committee's working draft bill, to allow the federal courts to force PHMSA to fulfill their duties when it is the agency that's dragging its feet. As I mentioned earlier, the National Academy of Sciences recently completed a congressionally mandated study that showed there were a number of serious issues with the way that PHMSA oversees spill response planning and the contents of those plans. We hope you will rapidly move to ensure that PHMSA is reviewing these plans not only for completeness, but also for efficacy as other agencies do, and require companies to provide clear information so first responders know what they are up against. We also ask that you honor the memory of Peter Hayes and request an additional study by the National Academy of Sciences to help alleviate the lack of information about how to better protect people from the short and long-term health effects of when pipelines fail. Finally, we have a few concerns with the language included in various reauthorization bills and hope you can address these concerns in your own bill. In particular, we think the wording in the statutory preference section of your draft bill may slow needed rules, We also think the language regarding underground gas storage needs to be clarified to ensure an open rulemaking process happens as soon as possible, and that whatever is passed allows states to set stricter standards for facilities within their borders. And finally, we think the language in the Senate bill regarding small LNG facilities pushes PHMSA too much to rely on industry-developed standards and hard-to-enforce risk-based systems. I see my time is about up, so I thank you for this opportunity to testify today, and I'd be glad to answer any questions now or in the future.
Mr. Weimer, thank you, and thank all of you for your testimony. And this time I'll recognize Mr. Olson of Texas for 5 minutes of questions.
I thank the chair for his courtesies and welcome to our witnesses. A special welcome to Mr. Black and Mr. Santa. As we all know, the first exports of American crude oil left Corpus Christi a few weeks ago, and this week, the first exports of American liquefied natural gas left Texas, Louisiana this week as well. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That's American liquid freedom going to Latin America and going to Europe. You guys are rock stars back home because of that. But let's talk about corrosion. In the investigation of the 2015 pipeline spill at Refugio Beach in California, they found corrosion in the pipeline. That fact should be no surprise. Obviously, gas pipelines and liquid pipes operate in tough environments. Soil corrodes. The product within a pipeline corrodes. And these aren't always brand new pipes. As I saw in our Navy, corrosion starts from day one. In fact, they attack it every day with what's called a paint and chip detail. Young sailors have a scraper, a bucket of paint, and a brush, and go all over the ship trying to curtail corrosion. It's a big challenge. So can you both please, with you, Mr. Black and Mr. Santa, discuss how you plan to control corrosion in your pipelines? Feel free. Big question, I know.
Corrosion may have been the biggest target of the modern integrity management regulations, and it's been a success. Internal and external corrosion is down by greater than 50%. I think there's a 70% over 10 years, and I'm happy to get that fact for you. External corrosion has been reduced greatly by the practice of cathodic protection, impressing the current onto the pipeline and turning the pipeline into a cathode and an anode. Suffers the corrosion consequences. Internal corrosion has been worked on by cleaning pigs, and then of course the inline inspection smart pigs
right across the hall, I think. Actually, a smart pig is there right now.
Yep, exactly. That are supposed to gather that information. Like you, we are concerned by what we heard in the PHMSA initial incident report, and we're eager as an industry to get the final results on that so that we can develop our industry-wide recommendations to operators to address corrosion. We've already committed to updating API Recommended Practice 1160, Pipeline Integrity Program Management, to address the properties related to the special type of pipe, insulated pipe transporting heated crude.
Mr. Santa, natural gas people, your pipelines, any concerns? Well, concerns with corrosion, but what is your biggest, what's your plan to deal with corrosion, control it? So still, the safest way to transport liquids is with pipelines, pure and simple. Another question for you, Mr. Black. PHMSA is looking to require remotely operated automatic shutoff valves in pipelines in the future. The GAO has done a report on that and found there are some safety concerns in some cases when they're used on liquid pipelines. What are your thoughts on automatic shutoff valves, and what issues do they pose for liquid lines?
Well, I'd like to distinguish automatic acting from automated valves. A practice in liquid pipelines construction today is to use remote-controlled automated valves to safely shut down a pipeline in the event that the pipeline needs to be shut down. Self-operating, self-actuating automatic shutoff valves cause safety concerns. GAO found that there can be a pressure buildup of an automatic valve closing quickly, and that can damage the pipeline. We reviewed and found 9 incidents caused by conditions similar to an automatic shutoff valve closing abruptly, one of which had more than 400 barrels put along the right-of-way. So remote-controlled, automated shutoff valves are important to be used in liquids pipelines and are.
I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. At this time, I recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Rush, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Weimer, in your testimony, you state that reauthorization should include directing PHMSA to conduct a study with the National Academy of Sciences to better understand the potential long-term health benefits from pipeline failures and provide recommendations for threshold levels in order to better inform evacuation decisions and the equipment necessary to measure such thresholds as part of the spill response plan. How did you come to this conclusion, and why do you think this issue is so important that Congress should address it in the upcoming reauthorization bill?
Yes, thank you for the question. We came to that conclusion from a number of sources. The recent National Academy of Sciences study mentioned the need for greater studies on both human and environmental impacts of crude oil spills. But we've seen it over and over again after incidents that have happened in the last few years. The first one that I became aware of was the one I mentioned in my testimony in Salt Lake City. A number of people and their children got quite ill after a spill when they weren't evacuated. There was general confusion at that spill of who was in charge, whether it was the local health department, whether they had equipment to measure the vapors and what people were breathing, and when evacuation should occur. We saw similar things in Michigan after the big spill into the Kalamazoo River. And then in Mayflower in Arkansas, when crude oil ran through a neighborhood there, we saw the same types of illnesses. Each state seems to have different thresholds for when they might evacuate people. There seems to be confusion who's in charge, and those ongoing instances of those spills and those same health effects, irregardless of the type of crude oil, has led us to the desire, along with the National Academy of Sciences, that such a study be done to clarify what equipment needs to be on scene, how quickly, and what those thresholds should be measured at.
It seems as though we are, I mean, that's a real nightmare of a thought that a pipeline would you have a pipeline rupture and not have any idea about its effect on your family's health. I mean, that's pretty alarming. Are communities around this nation, are they generally well informed and educated about pipeline projects and the number of pipelines and the capacity needs and what really is being transmitted through those pipelines? And are they aware about the benefits of these pipelines, the potential cost of these pipelines? And if they are not, then what are some of the tools that we can use to help spread the awareness among the American people regarding these pipelines?
Yes, thank you again for that question. I think communities are becoming more aware. Unfortunately, the communities that seem to pay attention are the ones where there's been an incident, so it's after the fact. PHMSA has done a very good job, actually, of putting a lot of information available on their website and trying to push out information, but it still hasn't sunk in. A lot of it falls on the industry. There's a lot of emphasis from the industry to work with the local communities to make sure emergency response and emergency plans are in place. But we need the communities to pay attention to that. There's a lot of lack of information. I'm an elected official in the county where I'm from, and I've been on the Emergency Planning Committee. You know, when I ask these questions about do we have MSDS sheets like the National Academy of Sciences asked for, or do we have monitoring equipment that will be put in place quickly if there is an incident, most of the emergency planners in my community and other places we've checked with just don't have that information. So there needs to be more proactive efforts by all of us involved to make sure local governments are paying attention.
Run out of time.
Gentlemen, time has expired. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes questions. I had asked Administrator Dominguez as she was leaving what is a reportable incident, and I would ask those of you on the panel, when are you required to report an incident to PHMSA, or do you know, Mr. Weimer?
It's funny that you asked that question, because Mr. Black and I were joking about that, because we're both on a committee with PHMSA working on indicators, and there's a number of different reporting requirements depending. There's serious incidents, that's when somebody gets killed or hospitalized. Those number of incidents are actually been declining, so that's a good trend. There's significant incidents, that's when you do $50,000 worth of damage, property damage, you kill or injure somebody, or you spill a certain amount. I think it's like 50 barrels for liquid pipelines, so a couple
50 barrels?
50 barrels, a couple thousand gallons. That would be considered a significant incident, or if there's an explosion or fire.
Okay.
And then there's reportable incidents, and I think that's as low as 5 barrels, or maybe even 5 gallons for hazardous liquid piping.
Okay. So there's like 3 or 4 different levels. Okay.
Those thresholds apply to natural gas as well.
Okay.
But they rack up to the dollar amount.
Okay.
Yeah, let me add to Mr. Bradley's point there that in some ways sometimes that leads to nonsensical results, because if you think about the variability of natural gas or oil commodity prices, think about natural gas prices.
Yeah.
And if in reporting the damage you are reporting the dollar value of the gas that was emitted, well, that's going to be a far greater value when the price of gas is $1
Right.
versus when it may be $4. So probably something there to ensure greater consistency to really measure what are the tangible damages
Right.
or effects, rather than something that
Okay.
depends upon the commodity price would make sense.
And Mr. Black, how many miles of oil pipeline do we have in the U.S.?
199,000 of liquids.
199,000.
Oil, refined products, natural gas liquids, and CO2. Yes, sir.
And natural gas?
Natural gas transmission pipelines, it's over 300,000 miles, of which about 220,000 is interstate.
And how much of crude oil being transported through pipelines is heated? What percent?
Very little.
Very little?
Only if it's necessary.
Okay. One comment I want to make, because if you notice the section 15 of our draft, in parentheses, they've got this private action of suit. And I noticed after the San Bruno incident, I think maybe I read this in your testimony, Mr. Weimer, where the city of San Francisco sued in federal court asking that the federal court require PHMSA to reject the state of California certification that the pipeline system was met the federal standards. And I had a little bit of a problem with that myself, because, I mean, that is the mission of PHMSA, to make sure that, so here you have the city of San Francisco suing the state of California, basically, as well as the federal government, asking a federal judge to mandate that they not accept a certification from the state. And so I have a real problem with Section 15 myself. And the sue and settle, for example, at EPA has really been a major headache, because what we see, third parties file the suit, they enter into a settlement with EPA and its lawyers or justice, and the states affected by those suits are not able to even participate in the settlements, which I find unacceptable. And so I agree with the three of you that this is a real issue. And having said that, I mean, I'm going to try to not include this, but having said that, I've got 50 seconds left, and I know Mr. Weimer disagrees, so I'll turn it over to you to make your argument.
All right, thank you for that. Yeah, we saw that after the the San Bruno incident you mentioned. I think the city of San Francisco and others were...
Is your microphone on?
Yeah, we're pretty aghast at the way that the California Public Utility Commission had overseen the law over the past few years. There's still, I think, even criminal investigations going on between the connections between the California Public Utility Commission and the industry out there. And that led San Francisco to file that. We're agnostic on the arguments that San Francisco made, but when we saw the federal courts step in and try to throw out the idea that the citizens or local governments could go to court to try to force PHMSA to do what their jobs requires them to do, that's when we thought it was important.
Thank you. And my time's expired. At this time, I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney, for 5 minutes.
Well, I thank the chairman. I thank the panelists for coming out here today. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Weimer. Do you believe that there's adequate representation across all interested parties on the advisory committees at PHMSA?
Yeah, the advisory committees are made up of the three groups: regulators, the public, and the industry. And I think the way it's designed, it's pretty well. The slots don't always get filled in a timely manner. Like at our last technical committee meeting when we were talking about the liquids rule, there were still 2 public slots that were open. So it would be nice before major rules are considered if all the slots are filled.
How about the actual staff of PHMSA? Is there adequate staffing, or is there an urgent need to fill more positions?
I think Congress has given them a huge budget increase that allowed them to add several hundred new, over 100 new inspectors. That was good. And they're also working on some program enhancements. So I think time will tell over the next couple of years whether they can fill those slots and whether that's an adequate number.
Well, in your testimony, you mentioned something about cost-benefit analysis. Could you expand on that discussion a little bit, please?
Sure. I think it was back in the 90s. It might have been the 1996 Act. Congress put in a cost-benefit requirement in the pipeline statute. As far as we can determine, this is the only administration that has kind of this double cost benefit, both in the statute and also then when the rules go to OMB. Talking with a number of people that do those things, they really think that can kind of slow down the process. And as everybody on this committee has mentioned, you know, PHMSA has been kind of slow to meet some of these. So since all of rules that go to OMB have to go through a cost benefit, this double cost benefit analysis early on, and then when it goes to OMB, may be slowing down rules unnecessarily.
Would industry object if the cost benefit requirements were eased?
You'd probably have to ask.
Mr. Santa?
Yes, Mr. McNerney. I would suggest that before the committee amend the law to, or propose to amend the law to address that it examine whether there in fact have been any instances in which the statutory cost-benefit analysis has added to the time and the burden. I would agree that the amount of time that it takes to get a rule through OMB is very troublesome, and that ought to be addressed, and that often seems to reflect the priorities of the particular administration that is in office, where some rules go through very, very quickly, and others get terribly bogged down.
Mr. Black, you said that you felt Congress should pass the law pretty much as it is now in the discussion draft form. At least that's what I understood.
Without adding significant new mandates to PHMSA, yes, sir.
So, mandates. Because I was going to say the Administrator Dominguez, her one recommendation to me was that they should have additional authority to react to critical situations. Would you agree with that or not?
Well, if PHMSA is aware of some safety information like the defective fittings she mentioned, we encourage them to get that word out as soon as possible. They've got that process right now through the advisory bulletin process, and I can tell you I've seen firsthand how important those advisory bulletins are to the industry. I'm not aware of any incidents that would have been avoided in the past if emergency order authority was in place. Ready to look at a proposal, but we would think it should have a high standard. It should address emergency conditions that pose imminent threats of widespread harm. Should be narrow in scope, should be subject to expedited review. Happy to look.
You know, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that you all in industry want to prevent incidents. There's no doubt in my mind about it, and that you'll take steps to do that. But I have a feeling that if it's left to industry, it'll be a little, tend to be optimistic, and you need a little oversight to make sure the optimism doesn't cause problems.
If PHMSA is aware of information like a defect, we want to hear about it as soon as possible. Their quickest way to get that information out is advisory bulletin process.
And not only that, but creating rules that cause high standards that cause industry to have safety standards that prevent incidents. What's the typical industry response to an advisory bulletin by PHMSA, Mr. Black?
Read very carefully. We have industry groups and employees working on pipeline safety issues, focusing on improvement, and they're dissecting those very closely. We've got instances of advisory bulletins in the last couple of years that have led to operators getting that aha moment and taking that back to their companies.
All right, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. This time recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latta, for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks very much for our panel for being here today. Mr. Santa, if I could start with a few questions for you. Can you comment on how your members use the 811 dial before you dig program, and do you believe that it would be helpful to incorporate new technologies or best practices to improve the communication between the stakeholders from receipt of that excavation notification until successful completion of the excavation?
Mr. Latta, INGA's members strongly support 811. One of the significant causes of pipeline incidents is excavation damage, and so we very strongly support 811 and strong programs to ensure that all excavators are subject to such programs. If there are specific proposals on how via using technology, the effectiveness of those programs can be improved, I think we'd be very interested in hearing that.
Let me follow up with that. Do you think, how can the federal government help advance the adoption of developing those technologies? Are there technologies out there that we should be doing that the federal government should be helping to advance?
Well, I mean, PHMSA has budget dollars in its budget that it can use in its own discretion for research and development. Also, there's the ability to do cost-shared research and development with the industry, since we all share the goal of improved pipeline safety and developing technologies that can improve that.
Thank you. Mr. Black, how do pipeline operators use inline inspection, the so-called smart pig technology, to find problems in their pipelines?
Well, you put this cylinder-shaped robot inside the pipeline and push it through with the force of the liquid, and it collects information about the properties of the pipeline, terabytes of information. That information is then taken out of the smart pig and it's analyzed by a third-party vendor working with the pipeline operator to determine what features need to be investigated. They follow industry practices and PHMSA regulations about which features need to be uncovered and inspected in person by a pipeline to determine whether there's something, whether there needs to be a repair, or whether it's just an issue that hasn't become a problem yet. The results of this, which costs more than $2.2 billion in 2014, has been a dramatic decrease in corrosion-related incidents and in all types of incidents since the modern integrity management practices were put into place.
So you're saying that the technology we have today has really increased the ability to find those cracks that are out there in the pipelines?
Yes, it's finding more. That's more for pipeline operators and these third-party vendors to look at. Now the challenge is taking all of this information, finding out what are those true positives that need to be addressed, and finding those issues and repairing them before they become a problem.
Let me ask this also. In the draft bill that we have here today, there's a provision that for the use of the smart pigs not less than once every 12 months for certain deep water pipelines. Is that a reasonable interval for that?
It would address pipeline water crossings of greater than 150. We would not support that being applied to a greater set of pipelines, and I'll explain why. Right now, pipeline operators are required to assess the condition of their pipelines and to prioritize areas based on risk. Determining a one-year inspection schedule is not really supported by the conditions of that pipeline. It's not reported by what has been found. It's arbitrary. If that's to be expanded, we'd find that it's diverting safety dollars from areas of greater risk. 1 year in pipeline integrity management for inspections is probably too soon. Anytime that pipeline operator does that smart pig and gets that result, some features that they find require analysis within a year, some are immediate. But to run a smart pig every year, you may not learn that much new from year to year.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. This time, Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask a couple questions of Mr. Weimer. In Ms. Dominguez's testimony, she requested that Congress give PHMSA emergency order authority, and PHMSA already has corrective action order authority that allows it to direct a single operator to take action to protect life, property, and the environment. But as I understand it, emergency order authority would allow the Secretary to take such action on an industry-wide basis, which seems like a common sense tool for the agency to have. I'm kind of shocked that they don't have it already. Could you just please talk more about this request, and specifically, what would the benefits of emergency order authority be for communities through which pipelines are routed? For instance, between 2007 and 2009, pipe was being produced and marketed that did not meet industry standards. In your opinion, would this have been a situation in which emergency order authority would have been helpful, just as an example?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think you hit the point right on the nose, that there's a number of issues that come up that are found because of an incident on a specific pipeline, and PHMSA has the authority to order that specific pipeline to change their ways, but currently they don't have the authority to order the whole industry nationwide to change things. Whether it's pipeline that wasn't made to specs that I think you were mentioning that came to light a few years ago, the fittings that Ms. Dominguez mentioned, or other serious things that become obvious that it's a nationwide problem. At this point, they have to go through a rulemaking that can take years, as we've seen. They do have the ability to put out advisory bulletins, like Mr. Black mentioned, but the industry is a broad spectrum of different people, and while we think most of the industry pays attention to the advisory bulletins, there may be some within the industry that don't.
All right. Thank you. And then a second topic deals with the TAG grants. The Pipeline Safety Information Technical Assistant grants are very important to me and a number of members. I think you know that the grants came into being as a compromise in 2002 after this committee reached an impasse on right-to-know language for pipeline inspection data. And I, for one, think we still need a strong right-to-know provision in law. If we had that, I think it would be appropriate to discuss changes to the TAG grant program. But the fact is that we don't have the right-to-know in the statute, so we need these grants in order for communities to have access to the technical expertise and info they need to truly understand pipeline risks in their area. A few minutes ago, my colleague, Mr. Mullen, raised some concerns about the TAG grants, and I'd like to give you a chance to respond to those concerns. First, does the Pipeline Safety Act allow TAG grants to be used for lobbying?
Well, I think specific to the statute, there's two things that are precluded from use of the money. One is lobbying. You're not allowed to use any of the TAG grant money for lobbying, and you're not allowed to use it for any type of lawsuit against a pipeline company.
So the answer is no, it can't be used for lobbying, it can't be used for litigation.
Correct.
Is there any evidence of a widespread abuse of TAG grants, or do the majority of such grants go for useful, lawful purposes?
Well, there's been over 160 TAG grants that have been let out over the course of the program. You know, I'm certainly not knowledgeable of all of those, but I don't know of any specific grants that have gone towards lobbying or lawsuits. Most of them have been used by local governments, local communities, looking at improving safety through, you know, GIS works, emergency response, looking at specific issues, not for lobbying or lawsuits.
Then my final question is, by allowing communities to hire experts to obtain independent pipeline safety assessments, doesn't that help everyone, industry included, by ensuring there is a real credible data out there on a pipeline? I mean, that's what these TAG grants are all about, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and we've certainly seen evidence of that. We were involved with a TAG grant from a group that got a TAG grant in California this past year, and they had a very concern about a hazardous liquid pipeline that ran through their community. Once we looked at the the incidents from that pipeline and went and met with that community, we kind of assured them that that pipeline wasn't as big a deal as perhaps working with the local governments in that community to ensure that they're dealing with emergency response correctly. Their concerns for that particular pipeline were kind of overblown once we shared the correct information with them.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. This time recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Capps, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all our witnesses for your testimonies today. Throughout the course of this hearing, we have heard over and over about the need to maximize the safety of natural gas and hazardous liquid infrastructure. The truth is that far too many of us have had direct experience with a devastating pipeline or storage facility incident that has led to significant harm to public health, the environment, or the local economy. And in every case, just as it did in my district in response to the Plains spill this last May, these incidents highlight inadequacy in existing management requirements. As we learn from these tragedies, it's critical that we apply this knowledge to make all of our communities safer. Mr. Weimer, you mentioned, my questions are addressed to you, Mr. Weimer. You mentioned in your testimony that the number of pipeline incidents has been steadily increasing over the past 10 years. Can you elaborate on a few, and I have several questions, so you can make it just one or two, that are leading to the increase, what are the causes leading to this increased number that we're experiencing? Does the abundance of aging and outdated infrastructure have anything to do with the uptick in incidents?
Yes, thank you for the question. And there was a graph in my written testimony that showed that the significant incidence on liquid pipelines has been increasing. It's again one of those measurement things about what are the things that make up incidents, but there's certainly been a rash of big incidents like the one that happened in your own district, the Marshall, Michigan spill, the one in Mayflower, Arkansas, that have kind of brought this to a head. The major causes, when you look at the PHMSA data, are things within pipeline operators' control, things like misoperation of the pipeline, corrosion, and bad equipment.
In other words, they are preventable. As a follow-up, can you elaborate on how emergency order authorizations could help ensure that systemic issues in pipeline infrastructure could be responded to in a more timely manner? As you know, there was quite a significant time lag between the start of the spill and a response, even though by chance the emergency responders were very nearby.
Yes, clearly, you know, if PHMSA had emergency order authority, it could help in situations where they learn something. Like the pipeline that failed in your own district, there's evidence coming out now, and it's not for sure yet, that because that was an insulated pipeline, that may have affected that pipeline differently. If it turns out that's the truth, an emergency order would allow PHMSA to correct that problem nationally.
Well, you've led to a topic that we should be addressing here in our committee. Now I want to turn to the need for improved response planning to quickly and adequately react to spills when they do occur. Without up-to-date and appropriate response plans in place, is it possible to respond to incidents such as pipeline failures and spills? In your view, what must all response plans include, and when should these plans be updated, for example, in response to changing conditions or new knowledge, to ensure that they are both adequate and current? That's a big question, I'm sorry. But you can answer quickly and then respond in writing for the record, if you will.
Sure. There's a number of things. You know, the National Academy of Sciences pointed out that PHMSA mainly looks at these response plans for completeness, not for effectiveness. They need to change that. They need to ensure more testing.
Thank you. And finally, you touched on the lack of stringent criminal penalties with regard to violations in pipeline safety. Are the current criminal and civil penalties regarding pipeline safety adequate to dissuade operators, especially the bad actors, from committing violations? Can you elaborate on the need to expand upon existing penalties? I hope you can.
Sure. The language currently in the pipeline safety statute is different than what it is on the hazmat side for PHMSA, where they include recklessness as one of the things that can be prosecuted. We think it should be harmonized with what they have on the hazmat side and with what a lot of other safety agencies also have.
And again, Mr. Chairman, I hope we can follow up with discussion of some of these topics. I appreciate your answers to my questions. It is clear there are many avenues for improving upon existing pipeline regulations. It's also clear to me that we must ensure that PHMSA has the necessary tools to make these changes, including those that have yet to be implemented from the last reauthorization to minimize risks associated with natural gas and hazardous liquid infrastructure. Once again, I would like to reiterate that I look forward to continuing to work with the chairman and ranking member to continue to improve upon the draft that we have so that we can ensure that we are crafting legislation that will minimize the frequency and impact of all future spills and protect our communities. And thank you, and I yield back 3 seconds.
Thank you for yielding back 3 seconds, and I want to thank all of you for joining us today. We look forward to continuing dialogue as we move forward on this legislation. And Mr. Sorry, we didn't have a lot of questions for you, but we did pay attention to your testimony and do appreciate your bringing to the forefront the state grant issue and the adequate compensation to the states. And particularly in Michigan, I guess you all have more underground storage of natural gas than any state in the country, is my understanding. So, but anyway, that will conclude today's hearing. We'll keep the record open for 10 days. And do I put this in? And I would like to enter into the record a statement from American Public Gas Association. Did you see those, Bobby? Yeah. As well as letters from Representative Capps to PHMSA dated February 29, 2016 regarding the Plains pipeline accident in California. Without objection, it's entered into the record. And thank you all again, and that concludes today's hearing.